Anyhow, well, we're all here. It is now 25 seconds after, I think, 2 o'clock. Shall we begin? Okay, I will just initially say that we have 3 hours together. There's a heck of a lot, as usual, on our agenda. If we get through it all, great. If we don't, it won't be for lack of effort on our collective parts. I think we know for the record that Martha guided by previous announcements on the to-do list today for work-related reasons. And let's move on. I guess the first order of business is usually public comment. I've never understood that. It always has seemed to me that public comment should come during the course of the meeting. But Elizabeth Fitzgerald is here. You're the only member of the public present. Do you have any comments? Okay, moving along. The draft agenda is before you. Are there any comments about it?
I have 2 amendments I'd like to propose. And the first is that I'd like to move that we simply reword agenda item number 5, which currently says act on March 6th protest of Elizabeth Fitzgerald, and frame that as respond to the an allegation of a violation of open meeting law. I'll pause if I can.
What's your second one?
Well, should I get a second on that one first?
Is that a motion?
Yes. And then I'm happy to explain
Is
my
there a
motion.
second?
So if I can speak to that, an open meeting law violation has a specific legal considerations, and I think that it's important that it's properly reflected on the agenda that that is what we are considering doing, independent of what our final disposition of it is. I just want to be sure that it's transparent that we are considering a response to a concern about an open meeting law violation.
Well, I'll comment. The protest had several elements to it. The one we're going to respond to has to do with the open meeting law. One that we'll get to as soon as we adopt the agenda and approve the minutes. But it's not accurate to say that the protest was exclusively about the open meeting law, and thus it's worded here. The protest had 2 or 3 elements. So I personally oppose changing the wording for that reason. And it will be obvious to anybody what this is about. So the protest itself is one of our documents.
Well, I'd welcome a friendly amendment to add, all right, no worries.
Are there any other comments before I call for a vote?
I would just note that Elizabeth described it as a formal protest, so.
That's why we use the word. Well, since there will likely not be a consensus about this, I'll ask for a show of hands, and unless you'd like me to call you individually, Laura, what's your preference? Will you note the vote by hands, or shall we just call by roll?
If you want it to be specific, again, I just put passed or failed unless you tell me you want it by people in the minutes.
I guess we'll go call by roll.
You can do that by hands as long as you understand how you want it recorded in minutes.
We're recorded by those in favor and those opposed.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Does the letter does go with the minutes? Yes, no?
It hasn't to date.
It would be in our official, our record, wouldn't it?
The resolution will be, of it will be.
No, but-
if we act
But
on it.
Elizabeth Fitzgerald, her,
It's already in our record.
it's in the records, right?
It's not currently attached to minutes. You didn't act on it or
No,
acknowledge
but
it at
it
the
is-
last
it-
meeting.
it-
It will be attached to
it's
these
already-
minutes.
public, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so then I'd say just
Well, it's
leave,
not public on the website.
Public is in,
If somebody asks.
if
for it,
somebody's looking for it, they can, it's
Yeah.
there, right?
Yes.
So then I would stick
If they
with
know how
protest.
to navigate Dropbox.
People can see it
Okay,
if they want to.
So a show of hands will be sufficient for you to identify the people.
is it holding up long enough?
All in favor?
Favor of-
Amending the motion,
That would be
or amending the agenda.
Tracy and Robert. All those opposed? And just for the record, I'll oppose it as well. So Fran, Peggy, and I oppose. So that motion fails.
Well,
Tracy, you have a second? item?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for being willing to consider that amendment to the agenda. My other amendment is not to the content of the agenda, but I would like to move that we reorder the agenda so that 12A, get your pencils ready, acting on pharmacy formulary changes for January 1, 2010. C, the engagement of the audit firm, and just that item, not the subparts of that item. E, acting on health program net position policy. And F, acting on extensions of the request for a temporary position to resolve TPA issues, be moved to number 6 on the agenda. And I'll pause before I explain why I'm recommending that to see if it
And that
is.
would move 6 onwards down,
That's right.
okay? Is there a second? Robert seconds it.
My rationale is really parallel to your opening remarks. Those are things that are essential to VHI's operations and need to be taken care of in order for things to continue to move operationally forward. And I wanted to at least put in a plea that we make sure that they get done and not get tabled at the end of the meeting because we didn't have time or not given adequate time.
My response is, that's understood, that we have to act on these items, and so I think our collective commitment is, whether they appear different, in a different order in the agenda or not, to make sure that we act on items that require action today. Otherwise, we would have every meeting beginning with actions that are necessary and never get to matters that and leave to chance whether we get to other matters. So what I prefer is that we simply make a commitment that before we meet, we will act on the 4 items. Well, I'm not sure why you excluded the subparts of Part 12C, but the commitment is to act on the items that you've highlighted. Is that sufficient for your purpose, or do you want to vote on this?
No, I made a motion, it's been seconded, and I think we ought to put necessary work earlier in the agenda, given the way that the board has been functioning. I want to ensure that, at least attempt to ensure that necessary business gets taken care of in a thoughtful way.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's the word necessary, but more time sensitive?
Well, you're changing, those are her words, Robert.
Well, he
I
can-
understand.
you
can-
We understand the point. The commitment that I think we should be making to ourselves is to act during the course of the meeting, whatever the sequence is, on matters that require action. So I guess I'll call for a vote in the absence of any other comments. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And me. So we'll continue. Are there any other matters related to the agenda? If not, we'll proceed as the agenda appears. All right. We move on to approval of the March 6th meeting, minutes, excuse me. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any items of discussion? in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The next item is item 5, to act on March 6th protest of Elizabeth Fitzgerald. As Robert knows, I'm going to yield the floor to him. But just to provide, from my perspective, the backdrop, Ms. Fitzgerald stated that the 10-minute break in our January 30th meeting violated the open meetings law, and she accompanied that by some references to the policies of the board as well. She used rhetoric that, in my view, is best left alone here to get this matter resolved today. In particular, accusing me and others of engaging in that break, quote, under false pretenses, unquote. That was wrong and obviously a bit inflammatory and unnecessary for purposes of our addressing the protest. Robert and I developed, with significant assistance from Rob Halpert, a mechanism we believe should resolve this reasonably amicably and in reasonably brief time. And with that introduction and from my perspective, necessary comment, I'll ask you, sir, to present what we developed.
Right, so I'll pass around copies, and pardon me that it was not circulated in advance. I think I consulted with Laura. The normal procedure is I wouldn't, or we wouldn't. And I'll read it, and as Joel noted, this was developed in close coordination with Rob Halpert, and being mindful of the issues that were raised in Elizabeth Fitzgerald's March 6th letter. And I apologize, I think as a procedure I have to read this. I will read this,
Okay.
because
That's fine.
okay. So this is, and forgive the whereases, this is not a normal, I feel like I need a bell.
If I can intersperse here, this format was Rob Halpert's notion,
So,
not either of our preferences, but it works.
whereas the Board of Directors met on April 29th, 2019 to consider the March 6th complaint by Elizabeth Fitzgerald regarding a short break taken by several board members during the January 30th meeting. The purpose of the break was to help the board reach an amicable decision regarding a motion under discussion. The complaint alleges the break violated the requirements of the open meeting law, which I'll refer to as OML going forward. Whereas Ms. Fitzgerald agreed that despite the more limited time frame within which a public body normally has to consider a complaint such as hers, which would be Section 1, VSA 31(4), subsection B2, the board could delay its consideration until April 29th. Whereas the January 30th meeting was only the second since the board was reconstituted in October 2018, and while there's been a suggestion that it undertake training about the OML, none had occurred as of January 30th. Whereas those participating in the break were not aware doing so might be in violation of the OML, the chair at the time did not participate in the break and opined, as stated earlier, that in the draft minutes of the meeting, quote, best practice of a board is to talk items through together, end quote, but neither she nor anyone else present suggested a break might actually be inconsistent with OML. Whereas the break served its intended purpose, the board was able to reach an amicable decision on the matter under consideration, whereas Ms. Fitzgerald submitted her complaint at the next board meeting, March 6th, whereas while no one intended, as the OML states, at VSA section 314, to, quote, knowingly and intentionally participate in the wrongful exclusion, end quote, of a member of the public from its meeting, the board acknowledges in retrospect that the break during its January 30th meeting was not consistent with the OML's essential requirement at 1 VSA section 312A that, quote, all meetings of a public body are declared to be open to the public at all times, end quote. Now, therefore, the board recognizes, its obligation to operate within the provisions of the OML, will not engage in similar breaks, and will follow through on its commitment to have representatives of the Secretary of State's office attend a meeting for in-depth discussion of the provisions of the OML to help ensure the board fully complies with it.
Thank you. So is that a motion from you, sir?
It is indeed.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any
So the
discussion?
entire thing is a motion, just for the minutes?
Yes.
So I'd like to move to amend the motion, and I have a number of amendments I'd like to suggest. Don't know if you want me to move them all, if you want me to explain them and then make a motion, why don't I do that, and so you get a context of where we're going. And then I'll
Okay,
make a
just,
motion.
yeah, we allocated 10 minutes to this portion of the
Yep.
agenda, Tracy.
Yep,
Be
so-
mindful of your initial attempt to move the agenda around.
Yep, so I wanna
and
go
our commitment to get things done.
quickly, that I've numbered the sections 1 through 10. In the first section, I think the statement that says the purpose of the break was to help the board reach an amicable decision regarding a motion under discussion should be deleted. I think the purpose doesn't matter. As educated, engaged citizens of our democracy, we understand that it would be easier sometimes to have conversations in private, but that just because it is easier or has an intended purpose doesn't make it right. I would delete all of the third, fourth, and fifth paragraphs. I think it's untruthful to say we haven't reviewed and discussed open meeting law. We have had discussions of open meeting law, and again, as engaged, thoughtful, educated adults, we are all familiar with the basic obligations of open meeting law. And I would delete from number 7, while no one intended, I think we did have a spirited discussion about whether or not it was appropriate to take a break. In fact, it was first posed not as a break, it was proposed as an opportunity for some members of the board to meet outside to discuss the motion being considered, and then was reframed as a break. So I feel like, although perhaps there's concern that it's the positions taken were and advocated by Elizabeth were inflammatory, I think it would be untruthful to allude to anything other than the basics that we found that Elizabeth raised concerns, the timing of her concerns, and our resolutions to resolve it. So I formally move deletion of the sentence in paragraph 1, elimination of section 345, and elimination of the "while no one intended" in number 7.
Is there a second?
Isn't Robert in charge? Is Robert in charge now, or are you in charge? I'm just.
I'm in charge. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm the chair.
yeah.
There's a difference.
Oh, I
Is
just
there a
was
second?
wondering, because this is about your conduct,
No, it isn't. It's about the board's conduct
including in particular your conduct.
and yours.
Excuse me, I'm gonna interrupt on this.
Thank you.
We are not getting anywhere. I think that this is conciliatory. I think it does raise the issues that we are completely up on the open meeting law. We were certainly not a quorum that went to discuss the issue. So that's where I don't see its violation. But I think that if we're gonna be just going after each other here, then it's a total waste for this board to even meet. It's gotta stop, folks. It's just gotta stop and we gotta move forward. I will not second your
Tracy,
amendment
I
though.
recognize. I have a comment. Before I ask for a second, I want the board to understand that this document went through a
Numerous iterations.
dozen or so amendments
Mhm.
to meet the purposes of the board and the segments of the board that are in this room. And with that, I'll ask if there's a second. Seeing none, is a second to Tracy's proposed amendments to this document.
Well, so we'll have to call a vote, to call the question.
If there's no second, there won't be a need to do
Oh, I'll
that.
second. But just with the proviso, I hear what you're saying, it doesn't change the tenor of what we talked about. Just so whether this is adopted or not, the basic tenor is not changed. But that's,
I don't
I don't want to, the underlying message of the motion is unaltered. But again, we're on a tight time crunch, but I'm just reflecting the changes that Tracy's proposing don't change the fundamental architecture we worked out with the law.
Is that a second?
Yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion to amend this document fails. Is there, I forget already, is there a second to the underlying document?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yes.
Yes,
That's-
Fran seconded.
Thank you, Frank.
Yes.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Can I speak to my vote?
Opposed?
I'll oppose then. I'd like to speak to the motion as it
Tracy,
stands
just
before we vote on it.
hang on. A no vote defeats the.
So I really don't want to do that, but I'd like to discuss
Okay,
my,
I didn't,
I'd like to discuss the motion.
yes, but you're interrupting me every time I ask for an act. And I understand you want to be recognized, and I'm happy to recognize you when it's appropriate. It was typically about 5 seconds. So, what's difficult is that you want to explain your vote
I'd like to discuss
before
it.
you vote.
I'd like an opportunity to discuss it, yes.
I asked if there was any further discussion. Is there any objection to
That's
opening discussion?
I
Forgive me, on discussing,
The motion as it was presented by you and me
yeah.
and Rob Halpern.
And I
Yes,
do-
ma'am.
Thank you,
Tracy,
thank you. And I do wonder.
we have not yet voted.
Thank you thank you very much. And I apologize, I'm trying to think a lot and participate. And I do want to say, I wonder if before we vote, we want to seek any public comment. But separate from that, I want to say that I believe that an open meeting law violation occurred and the remedies in this motion are appropriate. And that while I don't agree with the full contents of the motion, I think it's important that we acknowledge that and affirm the remedies. And in order that we can move forward, and because not doing so is the same as denying an open meeting law violation. So I'm not interested in opposing it and incorrectly conveying, I think, what my intent and what I think the board's response should be. But reiterate again that I don't agree with the full contents of the motion, and my support comes from my belief in the importance of validating it and committing to the remedy going forward.
Thank you. In that context, I think I'll call for a vote again. This time it will be a real vote. All those in favor of adopting the motion as presented by Robert, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Tracy, you suggested something about offering Elizabeth yet another opportunity to discuss this. I don't know that you want to, but I'm prepared, if you're prepared to say, to offer your opinion.
No, I will.
I would object.
Okay.
Could I request to speak from the chair?
There's an objection.
We had public comment time. I think we need to move on with all this.
In the interest of moving ahead quickly, can you limit it to like a 20-word sentence?
Absolutely.
Okay.
First of all, thank you to the board for considering my concern. At the end of the day, I think kind of a my bad would have sufficed versus all the whereases, but honestly, from a member of the community or the public, it got a little bit weirder for me that I got a letter from Joel in the middle of the process sort of explaining what the thinking was behind the break. But I think the board's doing its work in being responsible to monitor itself and its members individually, and that's the work of the board. Thank you.
Yes, the letter from Joel came by way of Robert Matovsky by agreement as an attempt to explain my bad. But you didn't accept it. You didn't accept it.
With Rob Halpern.
But let me finish. But Elizabeth Fitzgerald did not accept that letter in resolution of this matter, and that is what necessitated all of the interactions among Robert and Rob Halpert and me, ending up here today with the whereas. Shall we move on? Thank you, Elizabeth. The conflict of interest issue has been either front and center or front and off center since October. I presented on behalf of Fran and Peggy our perspective on the policy issue. In particular, the definitional problem in the policy as it relates to the bylaws. In October, in November in writing, at the December meeting, and I believe at the January meeting before I became chair. Today is the second meeting since I've been chair, and we are now acting here on the proposed amendments that were presented to the board months ago. I guess this has been my quote, baby unquote, so I probably should be the person to sign the motions, unless there's an objection. I don't know, Laura, did you hand out those materials at the beginning of this
A
meeting?
couple people asked for copies.
Okay.
I can make more copies if people need, but I have one more. But Fran, Peggy, and Robert were all given a copy. Tracy said she was good.
Okay, well, the
I have
document,
one somewhere.
that document is a much abbreviated document from what you've received before. The first,
There's an April 29th one I just gave you.
and so just a brief introduction to, there are two motions and a couple of additional pages that explain through the material. Motion number one is to conform the conflict of interest policy definition of conflict of interest to the definition of conflict of interest as it appears in our bylaws. And the basic explanation for that is, of course, no policy should be inconsistent with bylaws. The second motion would take a paragraph in what's called the implementation segment of the conflict policy and remove it. It was the segment that was inserted, as near as I understand it, for the purpose of addressing whether Jeff Fannin, as executive director of Vermont EA, would be able to vote on, or participate in the vote on the VI Vermont EA service agreement. And it's irrelevant for all purposes here. And so the motion would be to delete paragraph 8 as it appears in the implementation section. The accompanying materials I've also provided you, I think in January, at the request, I think, of the board itself. It's a page of just one man's, but with some decades of experience with these issues, attempt to summarize the concept of conflict of interest as it relates to this body. And the second page is two wordy lawyers, or former lawyers, attempt to elaborate on the meaning of conflict of interest for purposes of our disclosure statement and how I might complete the disclosure statement if I were in any of the several different positions that we have as board members. So, to take them serially, I'll make the first motion formally. I move that the first portion of the definitions section, and Laura, you have this motion.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Of the definition section of VHI's board conflict of interest policy be amended to conform to VHI's bylaws by replacing it in its entirety with the definition of conflict of interest found in Article 3, Section B of VHI's bylaws. And then I simply print the current bylaw, the current policy definition, strike it through, and then add in its place the Article 3, Section B definition from the bylaws. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a discussion? Yes, sir?
Well, I mean, bless you, the newest person to the board, I had suggested, I think at the first meeting when I was in attendance, that the issues of the disparity between our conflict of interest form, conflict of interest policy, and the bylaws is one issue, but there is the issue of perception of conflict of interest. And I believe I said, it's not something that any of us can necessarily define, though I respect your investment of time and effort in this. It's like beauty, it's in the eyes of the beholder. And maybe I said it to you in our individual conversations, I thought I said it in this room. I said we should consider seeking some type of guidance from an external source that would be, if I can use the term unimpeachable, meaning we would abide by what they said. And the one that came to mind is the Vermont State Ethics Commission, which offers these kind of opinions and could resolve it, again, rather than we saying there's no problem. I'm not saying there necessarily is a problem. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the points you made. I have your November 1st memo here, and I went through it extensively. It's not that I'm disagreeing with you. I'm merely saying, with something like this, we can't unilaterally say there's no problem here. I don't know how else to express that to you. I think that given that we're looking at, as you propose, meshing these three documents, there's also the issue of Vermont nonprofit law, which apparently would invoke a very particular reaction in my conversations with Rob Halpert about it. Given Section 8 of our execution policy, I think all of these things warrant that we should see if we can expeditiously get an opinion from someone like the State Ethics Commission. I don't know if that's possible, but I was going to say if it is, if we could find out if it is possible, to me that would square the circle once and for all.
I wondered, we had, oh, sorry.
Any other comments? Yes.
We had a legal review within the last year of our bylaws and policies, and had recommendations to consider, and this body hasn't had a chance to review that review and those recommendations. And I wonder if that's something that we could do as part of the comprehensive review of the Conflict of Interest Code of Conduct and Bylaws. Particularly as Robert points out about the importance of being sure we're aligned with nonprofit law, and the fact that our governance structure has just changed, it makes sense to me that we get some legal advice as well.
Peg.
So we need to be able to make some decisions in a very short time frame, correct? Right, we have service agreements that need to be acted on by June 30, maybe, June 30. This amendment, or this motion, the first one, excuse me, is simply to bring whatever policy was created, and I don't have the history on that, in line with the bylaws. For me, that makes total sense. That's a great place to start. Perhaps we can enter into some type of a review after that, but I think that certainly to align, I don't understand why something was created that was not in line with our bylaws, why there wouldn't have been a need to change the bylaws if it was so out of whack. So this makes a lot of sense to me, and I think would allow us to move forward, at least initially. Perhaps we have to require a review afterwards, or get another opinion somewhere. I think that we're all here with, I don't believe any of us have a conflict of interest. So I guess that's my take.
Robert.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I was merely saying, clearly, if they came back to us and said it's going to take 2 years, that's a separate thing. I don't know. I don't think one can say, I don't want to do it, and I don't know if they do it. But I'm saying that I don't think we have the kind of decisions due today that force us to do that. I too raised the issue. We have 3 articulations of conflict of interest, do we not? A form, bylaws, and a policy. Is there a 4th? And I only mentioned this to Rob Halpert in one of our many conversations. We didn't get a chance to go down that path. I'm just saying, rather than lock things in, if we do not have decisions due today that require moving this forward, and I don't disagree with anything you said, I just want to know what is possible. I don't see us, we could oppose looking into it if we don't know if it could be done expeditiously. You see what I mean? That's my point. I think there are ramifications here.
Our next meeting is in 2 weeks, right, May 14th? And then into June, and the contracts are due. So that's my concern.
I share that, I barely,
And I don't, I guess I'm not able to look down the road enough to see where aligning the definition of conflict of interest with our bylaws would in any way create a place that we couldn't come back from. It wouldn't be tipping us over the edge.
Yeah, I was, let me make a comment. I was involved in the development of VSBIT's bylaws. I have no memory of this issue. But I've been involved in the development of association, organizational documents for most of my adult life. And the fundamental rule is that no document may be in violation of articles of association, corporate documents. And secondary to that, no policy may be in violation of the bylaws. And so, pure and simply, that's what motivated me in the late summer to put some thought into this. And it is now more than half a year later that we still haven't acted on this very simple notion of conforming our policies to our bylaws. There is no barrier, however, and so if we wish to act favorably on this motion and couple it with an expectation of further inquiry, there is no barrier to our conforming our policies to our bylaws today and changing bylaws tomorrow. Any further board comments? Right, Laura?
So you just recall, you have some bylaw changes you've already approved that are awaiting going to DFR. We envisioned you sending them to DFR by June. DFR doesn't like to get piecemeal, so if you're going to do a bylaw change, to align them, it might make sense to do it shortly so that it can be part of that package. Just as a reminder, you've got some outstanding bylaws going on.
Thank you. Now, to be blunt, this motion fails if either Tracy or Bobby votes against it, or if any two of the remainder of the board. I do not want this board, frankly, to vote against conforming its policies to its bylaws. So I guess, Robert, I'm gonna suggest that there be a friendly amendment offered that would add a part B, which is, and in addition, the board commits to, and then fill it out somehow. But I will also say that I've been taken to task by a member of this board for not having this issue addressed. And so I'm feeling compelled, frankly, to push ahead with it, particularly in light of the fact that I'm under that pressure as well.
when is our next meeting?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So, what I would suggest, at least could we get, realistically, I'm not sure the State Ethics Commission
Is the
would
right
get back to us.
Or is the right body?
Well, then I'd like to know, and again, we're not talking about a long delay here, I would like to know before I voted for this. Again, not disagreeing with anything you said necessarily.
Yeah.
Can we hear from our legal counsel as to what is the significance of having these different articulations, and what is the significance of erasing those articulations? I mean, I'm not, so as an example, I believe in your memo that you wrote in November, and I'd have to find it, there was a legal opinion that was given, but.
On a different, on the matter relating to the second
Right,
motion.
but to prove my point, again, that you had concerns about that law firm. This is a country, I've been in Southwest, of many lawyers, and we could play whack-a-mole, but I'm saying our attorney, could we get, in 2 weeks, could we ask Laura to have Rob fill us in on what are the ramifications of these motions, having these 3 different versions? I'm not proposing an indefinite delay, I'm just,
Fran?
And just the motion, the first motion, that would bring the definition into agreement with the bylaw. Has there been anyone who's questioned the definition that appears in the bylaws that would make this problematic?
If there is, I'm unaware of it. Again, I don't recall participating in this aspect of the bylaws development in the nineties, but I was on the board for the first decade and a half of this century, and I don't recall. Well,
The law firm this summer brought that to the attention, that the two definitions were different and that they should be aligned. I believe they're different in two ways, but I haven't read that opinion for a while. One was significant pecuniary interest versus just a pecuniary or just a significant, I don't remember the terms.
Well, but
And the other was the definition of household business associate. So there are, and there was a recommendation in that, but I don't know which way it went.
I do. There were first of all, there are three differences. If you look at page 4 of my handout, the bylaws require a significant pecuniary interest, and the policy talks about a pecuniary interest. The bylaws include the interest of a business associate in the list of potential conflicts of interest, and the bylaws exclude any pecuniary interest that is no greater than that of other persons generally affected by the outcome from the definition of conflict of interest.
so
Those
if,
are all significant differences.
so if the bylaw, if the clause in the bylaw is acceptable, then I don't have a problem with, I mean, I agree that they should say the same thing. So that this would then be brought into agreement with the bylaw.
With all due respect, Mayor, I'm sorry, the bylaws that were developed in the 90s were before we were an intermunicipal insurance corporation. Maybe it's not corporation, intermunicipal insurance association, and I just would feel better if we had a legal review of which definition is right and best, understanding that now we're responsible to those considerations, Vermont's General Code of Ethics, and the guidelines for nonprofits. I don't know which definition is right, or whether it's both of them merged together in a certain way, if there's considerations we're missing, and like Laura, I know we did start to do a legal review, and we tabled it so this board could pick it up once it was reconstituted, and my preference would be, while I appreciate and respect Joel's many years of wisdom as an attorney, that if we have a thoughtful legal process
Well, if
with attorneys
we're
of the
going to delay
organization.
action, then I'd appreciate hearing from the person who took me to task for not having this issue addressed, withdraw the protest about it.
I wasn't that person, I wanted
We can identify who wasn't that person.
Well,
It's
but
up to that person to
I would just say
identify
again, I'm not
himself.
disagreeing with anything, I'm just uncomfortable here that as a non-attorney, and this is an issue that is completely out of our locus of control. Again, it's not what we think, it's what might be perceived. And so, in the same way that Joel and I drafted the motion on the OML situation in close concert with Rob, I would minimally, and again, I would ultimately like the State Ethics Commission to weigh in, but that frankly I recognize is a long-term thing. But I don't think it's unreasonable if we're meeting in 2 weeks to hear from our attorney as to what are possible, if any. Now, maybe there's nothing, but I'm just very leery, given we have a short turnaround. I don't disagree, we have things coming up, but that is not the same. And yes, I have Joel's memo, and I hear Joel's remarkings. I went through your November 1st memo in detail. But since we're talking about this now,
Is this a reasonable timeframe? Will the attorney be able to turn around and give us some information, some perspective in a 2-week time period?
We don't know, probably.
He's
I
been
know.
pretty responsive currently,
Totally.
but
I
Yeah.
have no
tell
idea,
you.
but I will contact him, I guess, with Robert. Robert did not contact him with me about this issue.
No, I had spoken in the context of when we were speaking on the many interactions on the OML issue, I said, by the way, he didn't answer me. It was just a by the way, so I have not said start
All right, well,
working on it.
then we can follow up with him.
If that is the sense of the House, I want to make sure that we're on the
All
same
right, well,
page.
this'll push into the May 14th meeting, which is also a review date in time, I think.
Can I just ask one other question? If the bylaws that we're working from were all developed before the change, part, that, do we need to be looking at all of them then, and, or having someone look and see if, because if we're gonna be doing one paragraph at a time,
It's a fair question. I believe we've looked at it with respect to the implications of Act 11, but I don't know of any review stemming from the earlier basic transformation to an intermunicipal organization.
The bylaws were revised in 2013 when we became an intermunicipal corporation. This particular paragraph wasn't a paragraph of note. It wasn't discussed particularly. Rob Halpert assisted in the development of the original Beehive bylaws in '96, the revision in 2013, and the development of the conflict of interest policy last year.
So that's obviously good information. We can assume that in 2013, when our legal counsel saw no particular relevance to the change having an effect on the conflict of interest provisions. All right, well, I mean, it seems obvious we should not vote today, is that correct?
Is it tabled?
And therefore, we will table this matter until,
Could we ask for, is it a motion to authorize, is it Laura or is it Joel and Laura
it's
to
not,
ask
it'll be the chair and the vice chair.
to ask for a legal opinion or to attend the next meeting? Is that appropriate?
Why would it not be our CEO that arranges that for us? Well, what, do you want
Why
to
don't you
table?
not interrupt?
That
And we'll
wasn't an
deal with,
interruption.
we'll deal with Robert's point first.
I guess the question is, do we want to invite Rob Halpert to come here so we can answer
My
questions?
suggestion is that we present the issue to Robert and see what his druthers are, and between us, we can, I think, make an adult decision about whether it would be in the organization's interest to appear as well as provide a written.
So if he says that to us, that's an acceptable outcome. And if not, he might give us a memo. Is that right?
You know, if we ask him.
May I speak, Joe?
Any other comments about that particular aspect of it? Okay, then, hearing on both Laura and Tracy's comment, we'll proceed that way.
And once, at some point, I don't know when that point is, could we authorize Laura, and perhaps with Rob's help, to explore what is involved to get a definitive ruling from the Vermont State Ethics Commission? Is that off the table, or?
Sure. You and I have had this discussion. I personally don't recall the Vermont Ethics Commission weighing into this arena.
Well, I don't know, so I'm saying.
But I sort of do, or did, I don't know if they've changed over the years. But we can certainly inquire about that.
So to be clear, it's, we'll ask the lawyer to either attend the next meeting or provide us with a written document,
Or both.
or both, that works as well, and to ask his opinion on whether it should go to the ethics committee?
No, what's involved in engaging them, that's all. If it requires a thesis or something,
Right.
you know, or it's a 5-year turnaround, but maybe Laura could.
The reason I'm asking that Laura not be involved in it is because she has a lot to do.
Okay.
And I can do some research about the Vermont Ethics Commission, or anybody else can if they want.
I'm your employee, I can take that task, you're volunteers, or it's
Well,
up to
then you
you.
can't say no to me when I ask you to do something.
If the board asks
Because
me
of your
to,
work.
if the board asks me to do something, I will absolutely do it.
That's good. Okay, Tracy, you have.
So I just wanted to say that in the interest of being an advocate for good board operations and also good organizational operations, I feel that it's appropriate to delegate the task to our chief executive officer to do the preparatory work so that the board can have the information they need to make a good decision at a future meeting.
Thank you. This is a matter about board
I was still
operations.
talking.
What?
I'm sorry, I hadn't finished. And now I can't remember what I was gonna say, but I do think it's important that we be attentive to good roles and responsibilities for both organizational operations and board operations.
I do too. With respect to the conflict of interest issue in particular, however, I think it is especially incumbent upon the board to act on its own. So if you want to make a motion, Tracy,
I move that we authorize Laura to reach out to legal counsel to arrange a process for us to get thoughtful consideration of our conflict of interest policy, code of ethics, and bylaws.
is there a second?
But in time for our next meeting.
If, with the goal of having it at our next meeting.
Is there a second? Are you seconding? Robert seconding. Any discussion? Peggy?
So again, just to be clear, so what we had just discussed, only now you're just saying that Laura
Just
should
want Laura to
contact the
do her
lawyer
job.
instead of
Yeah,
the
set it
board
up.
chair.
Okay, for clarity, I think this is different to what they're doing, no? This is instead of what they're doing?
Yes.
So then can you run through for me again? Because I just have to, if it was the same and you said yes, so. What's the current motion? To authorize Laura to,
It's Tracy's motion, I'm gonna let her tell you what it is.
Okay, I didn't know if you had it.
Coordinate with legal counsel a process to review our bylaws, code of ethics, and conflict of interest policies, hopefully at the next meeting. And perhaps have information about the options for the process for review by the
Vermont
Ethics
Ethics
Commission.
Commission is what you're seeking.
Yeah.
We'll leave the motion as stand. Robert, did you actually second that motion?
Yes, if everyone understands it.
I do not understand it.
In other words, instead of, I'm sorry.
Well, I confess to not understanding it, but it's not my motion.
But as I understood it, may I?
Yeah.
In lieu of Joel or I reaching out to Rob Halpert, in lieu of Joel or I calling whoever at the State Ethics Commission, we're tasking Laura to do that on our behalf, so that at the May 6th meeting, we will either have Rob Halpert here with a report, or Rob Halpert here without him physically present, with an update on the ramifications of Joel's motions.
that part I agree with. I did not hear that, Tracy, and what you were saying.
Oh,
Yours
I'm
was
sorry.
much longer and more involved and sounded like a process for me. Could be drawn out completely. If it's about having Rob here at the next meeting and or with a
I
written
just think
statement.
Laura needs to do that. She's our CEO. We need to task her to do that.
And I understand that part, as long as the end result is that either he's gonna be here or a decision will be here at the May 14th meeting.
I intend with Robert to contact Rob Halpert to discuss these issues at length.
Well, let's be
And
clear.
if the motion is for Laura to contact Rob Halpert so that he will attend a meeting, that's different. If that's your motion,
No, my motion is not to have you not contact Rob
so
Halpert.
you want to prohibit the chair and vice chair from contacting Rob Halpert about these matters. Is that
I-
correct?
But
Is that correct or not?
I think you should not be in charge of arranging that. I think that Laura should facilitate Rob doing that for the full board. Or someone should facilitate that for the full board.
All right, well, you know where I stand. Mark, you
I
want to say
think
something?
what's confusing me is what precisely is Rob going to be asked to do here?
Here's what I heard, since I'm the one that might get tasked with it, you might wanna know what I
Well,
heard.
that's,
No,
to be
but-
quite honest, in all fairness to you, I think it's
I'm not
important.
asking you, it's the board asking about this decision.
I do not know what it is Laura is going to precisely be asking Rob to do.
But I think it was said.
If it isn't in the if it isn't clear in the motion itself, it isn't clear enough. What is the motion? Please restate the motion.
Laura, do you have your draft motion?
Yes, my understanding is Tracy's motion is moved to authorize me to contact legal counsel to find out about the ramifications of having two different opinions the implications of both current definitions, his advice on what the best definition for the board to have for conflict of interest going forward, and to contact the Vermont Ethics Council to see if they would do a commission, to see if they would do a review, and if so, what do they need to do that? No?
First off, and again, this is testimony, my confusion, we have 3 articulations of conflict of interest, do we not?
No, I think the disclosure matches the policy, it's inconsistent with the
And it
bylaws.
wasn't.
And ultimately, the disclosure should match the definition that we adopt.
It was not, forgive me, if it's in tonight, Joel. It was not to contact the commission to get anything started, just to find out.
To find out process.
What is the
correct.
process, that's all.
Do they
I
do
not
it,
know.
what would
They
the
do it, if
process?
they did it for a $500,000 fee, I'm just making this up, clearly we're not doing it. If it's a 10-year turnaround, we're not doing it. Just to find out the process is not evident from their website, that's all. But the main point, Mark, is what I want is to hear from our counsel before I agree to something, and then have to perhaps backtrack, possibly under duress, if there's a complaint made. I'd rather, I'm sensitive to what Peggy said, I agree we have stuff to do, but we're meeting in 2 weeks.
I have concerns about Tracy's suggestion. I'd rather not articulate them, but I believe it's, in this context, a rare one, that this issue of the conflict of interest matter belongs in the hands of the board and not the staff. If you want me to articulate my reasons, I will. No, I don't want to, but I will oppose this motion in favor of Robert and I essentially extending our dialogue with Rob Halpern. Any further discussion before I call for a vote on Tracy's motion to prohibit the chair and vice chair from acting in favor of Laura? Do we, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Do you have all the
I'm
names?
getting good at it, yes.
Good. And I don't have to ask you to do that, do this one.
So to be clear,
So the motion before us remains my motion, which is,
Yours wasn't a motion.
It is, it says I move.
It was consensus of the board until Tracy made a motion.
okay. The standing conclusion that I have, unless proven otherwise, I guess, that Robert and I will contact Rob Halpern about any and all matters relating to the pending discussion about conflict of interest.
and I'm not comfortable with that, so ask that it be a formal motion directed by the board.
I so move that the chair and the vice chair meet with whatever his name is.
Rob.
Legal counsel.
The council, to determine if these motions are appropriate, what needs to be changed, is there ethical issues that need to be addressed.
Is that sufficiently clear? Is there a second?
Friendly
Hmm?
amendment. I would say, you don't even physically meet.
No, Bob and I, you can send, pigeon messages, I don't,
No, I'm
But
just
you
saying that.
We understand, the sense of the motion is that we will contact Rob Halpern to explore the issues that we have raised. regarding
raise to see if we can
conflict
get
of
this, if this meets muster, or it has to be altered.
I'm sorry, but it's not ethical muster, it's legal muster. I'm not asking him for
Right, no, if
a
it's legal.
opinion as to what are the ramifications
Mhm.
of Joel's motions.
Second?
Okay.
Peggy?
Second.
Peggy seconds. Any discussion?
Yeah, I just wanna say again, I'm really most interested in his, as you said, Robert, legal opinion, written or in person, as to, having 2 different definitions for conflict of interest, because I'd like to be able to sign something and move forward soon.
Exactly. So as would I, and I know for as well. All in favor?
No,
No?
no.
Okay, we will have no contact with Ron Halpert regarding the issue of conflict of interest by virtue of Tracy's death. Is that correct? Is that the understanding you?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I suggest a way out of this?
Yes.
Can we, rather than have communication before May 6th, why don't we put Rob on the agenda with a heads up? And whatever issues Joel or I were going to tell him, we'll discuss in here. It'll be on the cuff for him, unless he does some preparatory work, which I imagine he would. We would just give him a heads up, we want him to attend our May 6th meeting to discuss the differing conflict of interest interpretations, and we can ask him whatever Joel or I were going to say on the phone or an email, we'll say then. This way
Just
we're
from the
not-
just from the standpoint of having been an attorney for 4 decades, that's all well and good, and it's appropriate. But boy, you sure wanna go into a meeting knowing what you've been asked, and you sure wanna have a written response ready to go. So, that's, you can do whatever you want, but it's not a particularly wise expenditure.
Well, I'm, needs to be more efficient. And sitting here and talking to a lawyer, no offense to the lawyers present, tedious.
With the lawyer present.
I know.
And his license has lapsed, it's not.
Would, and for some reason, Tracy, you seem to not want the board chair and vice chair to do this on their own. But I think it's inefficient for us to sit here and spend time with the lawyer with our questions. Would you allow for the chair, the vice chair, in coordination with Laura, to come back with whatever comments the lawyer has on these issues? So that we can hopefully move to a vote, so that we're not getting ourselves loused up when we have to start taking actions.
I actually agree with something that Joel said earlier, which is that this is important work for the full board to do. And I do not support a process where the details of the interpretation are negotiated outside of the board meeting by designees of the board. I'm fully supportive of a process where we have the policies in front of us, we have the past legal review, and we have legal counsel for VHI, whose primary focus is VHI, here to give us information and insight. To be clear, my concern is that I'm not comfortable with, I want that discussion to happen with the full board and with all of us having the benefit of the information and the opportunity to be an active participant in the process. That's a part of where my concern comes from, and again, in my experience with high-performing organizations, the CEO of the organization, with direction from the board, sets that up and gets the resources at the table for that to happen. Yeah. I think we want the same thing, the question is how we get to it, and I think it needs to be the full board and not between or outside of meetings.
Yes, sir.
Would it be antithetical to what you said, and picking up on what Joel said, to invite our legal counselor March 6th and tell him this is what we will be talking about? There is the 2 different definitions of COI. We're attempting to resolve that, and to your point, yes, so he's not walking in blind or deaf. This is the subject of conversation. He can prepare whatever he wants in advance, and we will have that conversation amongst us all, and hopefully it will be expeditious, because we have things to discuss. Would that work?
I think he should certainly have a heads up, otherwise I think we are wasting his time, our time, and a lot of money along the
I
way.
just think Laura can do that.
That's been asked and answered.
So,
I disagree, and I'm gonna just continue to disagree.
can we craft a question that somebody can email to the lawyer with the date of the meeting and ask when he can be here?
Did we vote
Can we do
on
that
the
right
3 of us
now?
doing that?
So that he has the information, what we're trying to get him to answer?
In the interest of resolving this, I propose that Robert and I and Laura contact Rob Halpert for all of the above related purposes between now and May 14th. All in favor?
Wait, what are the above related purposes? I can't vote until I'm clear about what you mean by that.
Providing
All matters relating to the definition of conflict of interest and its implications for VSBIT.
No, I can't abide by that. I want the discussion to happen here.
What is it that we need to have on the table for you to discuss? I just want them to bring us the stuff from the lawyer so we can have the discussion. If you want us to start raw with the attorney and do the discussion, that's inefficient.
No, what I don't want is a discussion outside of this meeting between individual members of this board and legal counsel.
I think we're saying the same thing. We want to invite him here with a heads up, that it is not what you were saying, with a heads up. This is what we want to discuss. And he'll come in, he's up.
You know, there are high-functioning organizations, and then there are high-functioning organizations. The high-functioning organizations I'm familiar with actually call in experts and give them information and tell them what it is they want to learn about, and offers views about what different people have in mind. That's good? Is that good?
I don't object, I agree with that.
And therefore, does that change your mind about authorizing the three of us to contact Rob?
Is this that you gave us, is that something we would send to him? Is that, I mean, it's not new information.
That's
I
what
don't
I
know-
was
I don't know the answer to that.
Could we send this to Rob, say this is our current motion that we wanna proceed with one way or the other? We'd like your legal opinion on it, do the research, show up on May 14th and tell us what your,
What about our last legal review?
What about what?
The last legal review thing?
I'm sorry.
The
probably
last-
hasn't, did he do
The
it?
last what?
Legal review.
He did not
Legal
do it.
review? Oh, well, if he's, oh, I don't know why he didn't do it, if he's our lawyer, but,
To go out of state so that there would be more neutrality.
Excuse me.
well, there,
Wait a minute. What are we talking about?
The
We
last
had
legal
a
opinion.
legal review
Of what?
of our bylaws, code of ethics, and conflict of interest, and have a multi-page document that we started to review maybe
August.
Who did it?
August of last
Is
year.
that the Albany law firm?
Yes.
That was not an overall review of conflict of interest matters. And I would object to making any use of it
Well, this board-
for reasons that I've made plain since November 1st.
This board hasn't even had a chance to review that and decide whether they agree with you or not. So,
Yeah, so what?
so
So what's your point?
I'm glad to understand that you object. I don't remember it being on the agenda as an item.
You
but-
didn't put it on the agenda for 4 months.
Well, you didn't either. I think it's important context and background that this board ought to review.
You all have it, you can review it.
We should review it as a body, as a board, as part of our preparations for updating our bylaws and policies.
And I hope you all have a lot of free time this summer.
Well, if we're doing that, then there's no way we're gonna be able to have any kind of ability to take any actions, because what you're proposing is gonna take up an awful lot of time and a lot of meetings, and there's no way we're gonna be ready, we're gonna be able to vote on any actions. So we might as well just,
You know, we have a decision-making mechanism of our own devices. We all agree to it. And we're gonna have to abide by it, because I don't see a ready mechanism for altering it, given the way we make decisions. That mechanism is as close to a consensus model of decision-making as exists, short of one denominator, consensus decision-making. It means not only that people have the right to disagree, but they have an ethical obligation to seek common ground. In the absence of a sincere effort to seek common ground, we will in fact be stymied as though we had a simple majority decision-making mechanism when everybody is present and people decide to play their roles, and then there will be a series of 3-3 votes. What I know about consensus, I know from decades of experience with it, it works, but only if people come to the table prepared not to stand in the way, but to help find a way. And right now, we are not seeking a way. Yes.
I think that the issue here is to blend into the conversation, which I think we agreed was a good idea if it can be accommodated within the rather tight time parameters that we have, to blend into the conversation that opinion from that previous firm, which as Joel said, we all have. It's not a matter of hiring them again. And again, I've come back to Peggy's point, stating the obvious, we have deadlines here. But if it's a matter of the proximate cause of this last exchange was to factor into a conversation that prior report as an opinion, which it was, and the opinion of our attorney, and Joel's opinion, which I believe is incorporated. Joel, am I right in your, actually your November 1st, 2018 memo, and then updated here? And we'll have a conversation as a board. And then move forward. Is that, am I understanding where we're at?
I truly don't know. I can't answer for Tracy Rand about this. I think, if I may, Tracy, try to get inside your head. Your perspective is that under no circumstances should any individual or multiple members of this board engage in any background discussion about any issue except as a full body. That's your definition of a high-functioning organization. Is that correct?
No, that's not my definition.
Okay,
of
that's
a
how it has
high-functioning-
appeared to me.
I am saying that specific to the matters that we're discussing, conflict of ethics, or conflict of interest, code of ethics, and our bylaws, particularly as relates to the matters of conflict of interest and code of ethics, that discussion needs to be structured and facilitated in a way that ensures that all of the discussion on this matter happens at the full board, and that we do take the time to do a full review of those documents, the information we have in the past, consider your information, but also get good legal opinion. And I have said already, and I'll say it again, that I do not think it's appropriate for this set of issues that there be board members delegated to have discussions in advance of the meeting about the contents of those documents, and that we simply ought to authorize our CEO to arrange a process for us to have that conversation with good advice in public at an open meeting with the full board. And I don't know if Martha can be at the full board. I don't remember her schedule, but it would be nice if Martha could be here as well.
So
Go ahead.
I think
I'm
we're
sorry.
splitting hairs here, and in the interest of moving on, I think we agree that, subject to the time constraints that we face, we'd like to hear from our legal counsel. We will have a conversation at our next meeting about conflict of interest to hopefully resolve this. As input to that conversation is Joel's memo, actually his November 1st, updated by what you said was April 29th. Whatever Rob Halpert brings us or wants to tell us, if he wants to attend. And if we can, each of us just quickly review the legal opinion we had received in the past, so that we all come in and discuss openly. And I don't think that's antithetical to what Fran said or what Peggy said. I'm not saying, as Joel pushes, to have a discussion over the next 4 years. It's not like amending the Constitution. The clock is ticking. I think we all understand that. We're still getting things set up. This is a fundamental thing. I think we should, I don't disagree with anyone here, but I think we should all be involved in that conversation, as opposed to giving somebody something, saying vote on it, however well-intentioned and well-informed.
So,
So we're just talking right now conflict of interest. For the
Correct.
next meeting,
Just conflict.
because that's what we have to resolve in order for us to take actions.
It appears to me, I mean,
Well,
So I think we need to-
sequentially, what you and I discussed and what has been obvious for some of us is that because there was an opinion sought without anybody asking for it, or initiated with this Albany law firm regarding whether you guys, Fran and Peggy, can vote when it comes to determining the agreement between Vermont NEA and VHI. Forget how I started that sentence, but I think you get the idea. That sets in motion an obligation on our part to resolve the issue of conflict of interest. And you'll all remember that I raised the obvious dissonance between the policy definition and the bylaws definition half a year ago.
I would say that
That's a simple matter.
that's a mischaracterization of the work that Laura did and the work the board discussed in August. And think that it is fair to say that both Laura and the board recognized, even before reconstitution and before you were appointed to the board, that those inconsistencies existed and we need to reconcile those. And the work started in an attempt to do that. It was tabled at the request of some board members, thinking it would be best for that to be resolved when the new board is reconstituted. So I think it would be inaccurate to say that the perception of anyone was to prevent the new board from being able to make decisions or people from voting. It was an attempt to get information so that we could make good decisions and set this newly constituted board up to be operationally effectively. It was decided that wasn't the way to go, but anything other than that as a set of intentions is inaccurate.
For the life of me, I don't understand how we really disagree, but you made your point and it's on the record.
Thanks.
Maybe we can build off of you on a motion, that we can take some action here.
yes.
The idea that, Laura, I have no problem with you and the chair figuring out what materials we need ahead of time for our next meeting, what consultation should be given with the lawyer regarding the conflict of interest issue. Let's keep it there right now. And also, then we can see what we need to take further. And that we have the full discussion at the next meeting. The lawyer can come, great, but that we have the information so we can have the board discussion about conflict of interest, and just focus it on the conflict of interest issue right now.
Really, the request is even more narrow than that. It's to get a legal opinion from our counsel on the current disparities, and Joel's motion, or what are the alternatives if he were to say, no, you can't do X or Y. So just a legal opinion. It's not a history of COI, or it's even more narrow than that. Is that?
I would second.
And I want to reiterate.
Let me try, I think I'm being consistent here. The motion would be to authorize the chair, vice chair, and president to contact legal counsel and request an opinion regarding regarding whether and if so, how to resolve the dissonance between the meaning of conflict of interest in our policy and bylaws.
Yes,
Do it?
I will make that motion.
Does that do it? Is there a second?
And I'm thinking that,
Are you a second?
well,
His
just
hand
to
went up,
clarify,
but
because
Peggy's hand went
that
up too.
opens the door to him attending, if it's appropriate, or not, if he feels I'm gonna send you something. Is that right?
He can make that decision.
Okay.
Going once, going
Yes.
twice. Is there a
Can I-
second?
Clarify
Is there
the
a sec?
question?
Is there a second? I think it was Peggy.
Oh,
I will, if it
And
gets
I don't
its
think
go.
Robert did. Is there discussion?
does that mean you're just gonna reach out to him and ask for that assistance and schedule, or is there gonna be a discussion about those things?
I can't anticipate that. If Rob Albert asks for an opinion or information, I think I'm inclined not to hide the ball from him, and I suspect Laura would feel that way and that Robert would feel that way.
I mean, again, you have this, if Joel wants to send
It's a
him
public document.
this,
That's fine.
but it's, to your point, if I may, we're not going to have the COI conversation among the three of us and Rob.
Correct.
It's merely to fill him in, backing way back to Joel's point, so he's not walking in there saying, what do you want to talk about?
Right.
It's a focused conversation. He might choose to attend, might not. It's simply to get a legal opinion on this issue, of which, as our homework, forgive the expression, we should not only review, although I'll show you, highlighted your November 1st.
I'm very impressed.
Thank you, I wouldn't impress you, but also, we can look back on the other firm's opinion and anything else you feel is helpful. But the conversation, I do understand and agree with Tracy's core point. We should have that conversation here.
It's important to me that there is a negotiation outside.
Are there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I guess that resolves the conflict of interest issue for today. I want to restate, however, that I have still been taken to task by a member of this board for failing to get this issue resolved, despite now attempts in all months but February.
So, do you want me to speak to that?
I
'Cause
don't care if you do or not. You have an opportunity to if you want.
I raised concerns about possible violations of, or inconsistencies with code of ethics and conflict of interest and duty of loyalty. Without going into the details, do not see that as and in no way, shape, or form was that an allegation that a chair or an individual did not adequately take steps to address the inconsistencies with those policies and procedures in the bylaws. Rather, my concern is that regardless of which way you read those, an individual on the board is not meeting the standard, and that's what I'll say right now.
I'll let it go.
Thank you.
For now. We are, in fact, running late, obviously. That said, let's continue until we see if we can shorten some of this. The next item on the agenda is a report on legislative testimony and consideration of action regarding S41. This item's on the agenda, I think at my request. Bobby Joe, I hope you're listening.
Oops, I'm distracting her.
It's about the S41 testimony. And my understanding is that we all received the lengthy, I think it's almost redundant, the lengthy testimony that Mark and Bobby Joe presented to the House Healthcare Committee. It's unusual for us to be testifying. It seems to me to be perfectly appropriate for us to get some sort of reaction or response from those who provided it. And in particular, at the end of your testimony, you gave the obligatory, we'll be happy to respond to any questions you may have. And I'm particularly interested in the board hearing if there were in fact any questions that arose. So I don't know which of you would like to just be brief about it. Just tell us what happened.
They kind of interrupted us a number of times during the testimony. We didn't really get all the way through it. We had to kind of skip around. Their question to us was generally, does this document, holding up S41, will this solve the issues of the employees by what they're doing with it? And we didn't really have an answer as far as whether or not what they had written down would indeed have solved issues for members, simply by regulating, depending on what that regulation meant. So that's,
Yeah, I mean, To build off of what Bobby Joe said, the testimony at the House Committee was different from the testimony in the Senate, although our presentation was pretty much the same. We had to make some adjustments for the House because time has moved on and there were some additional changes to the testimony. I think from my perspective, what was awkward for us, and I think this is consistent with what Bobby Joe just said, the House Committee really wanted to get to what should we be doing to make sure this doesn't happen again. What are your recommendations? And we had a list of things in the back, the last page of our testimony, that we thought the committee should consider. And we were put on the spot a couple of times by the chair, who wanted to know what the position of this board was in relationship to S-41. And Bobby Joe and I, of course, told the committee that the board had not taken a position on S-41. And that seemed, I don't want to say bother the chair, but seemed to baffle the chair, because he came back to it a couple of times. Eventually, we moved on, and the committee decided that they needed to speak perhaps more with DFR about toughening up the regulatory functions to address the concerns that Bobby Joe and I had raised on the last page of our testimony. The Senate did not press us on the board taking a position in the same way the board chair did at the House level. And again, it was just awkward for the two of us to be in that
The
position.
chair of that committee is Bill Lippert, who's been in the State House for 30 years, and is without question one of the top 5 most respected people in the building.
And I think because VHI has been at the center of this storm, and because we're trying our best to help school districts and school employees, and we took the time to testify before 2 committees, and the testimony, as Bobby Joe and I and Laura know, was not short. It's several pages, there's a lot of detail to it. It just seemed there's some incongruence between all of that and the board not taking a position.
Can I also note that the original time that we were talking about it, we had just talked about it, I think at the board meeting on January 30th, and then we were asked to testify within, the first week in February. We didn't know that we were going to be asked again. Perhaps that had we known, we could have brought it back to the board again, and we were just actually, I think, a little bit surprised that we were asked again.
Well,
Have we missed our time? Is it appropriate for us to take action? And we did discuss it, was it January 7th meeting? I recall
Briefly,
that.
yeah, briefly.
The bill has passed the Senate, I believe, I don't think it's passed the House.
Okay.
no.
So I just want to point out that your articles of incorporation say that there no substantial activity shall involve attempting to influence legislation. Now, obviously, substantial activities isn't defined, and so I think you have discretion, but you should be aware that that's in your articles of incorporation. I think Mark and I did a history, I think at the request of Joel. We think there's only 2 times that VHI has taken positions on legislation, and that has been when the legislation itself was about VHI, about whether we should exist and how we should exist as opposed to anything we do. I'm also not familiar with when you have to register as a lobbyist. So if you take a position, who then communicates the position? If it's Mark and Bobby Joe, do they have to register as lobbyists? Who has to manage that? Because it's quite extensive, you have to report frequently now, it used to be twice a year. So I just wanna,
Each of those questions has an answer, though. And they're
I
very-
understand,
and they're very
I wanted to
simple
raise issues with you, that this would be new ground for you to take a position on a bill, and you should do it in the context of the implications, including the lobbyist requirements and your articles of incorporation. I'm not suggesting what you do, but that you have that information.
There is, that's all well and good, but our representatives to the legislature were called to testify. That doesn't qualify as lobbying.
Correct.
They were asked if the organization had a position. An answer to that would not constitute lobbying. If we extended the effort to lobbying, we would, of course, register people appropriately and have appropriate spokespeople. This does not constitute substantial legislative activity by by any definition I'm familiar with. So the question before us raised by Peggy is, I think, is it appropriate for us now to take a position on the bill? As Mark suggested, it's passed one house, and and as I think I understand, we're in the last 2 or 3, and that means possibly 4 more weeks of the legislative session. I don't know how quickly the House intends to act on the bill. I don't know if there are distinctions between the Senate version and the House version that will require them to work it out. And I will say, from more than 3 decades of experience as a paid and paid-for lobbyist, that it's in resolving differences between versions that the significance of a well-respected, thoughtful position has the greatest weight. So, it's up to this organization. I will also say, and I think it's pretty obvious, there is rarely, I think there has never been a bill introduced that is not about the structure of VHI that is more closely related to the work of VHI. So, it's up to us. We've now experienced bafflement for not having a position. Any discussion, and then we can move on if there's no motion. But first, Robert.
I was remiss in not sending you an email when you had kindly sent me your testimony. Thank you both for it. It was very well thought out, and I appreciate you doing it, so belatedly. Oh, I thought, okay, I was having like an Area 51 moment. Having said that, I guess I will confess, I haven't immersed myself in the details the best sports time. And though I'm accused of being a boring person, because I do get excited.
Not by me.
No, that's true, but others have said I like to read the business press, but I have not immersed myself in this act. So other than a cursory description, which I believe Laura gave us way back, I would have to confess it's difficult for me to credibly comment on something I haven't reviewed, but I have a general question, and mirrors our conversation with COI. What would the ramifications be of us weighing in or not? I'm not terribly concerned about baffling somebody unless that's going to be accompanied by an invoice that I'm going to have to pay. I'm not trying to minimize it, I'm just saying what's the worst that could happen, and what do we get out of weighing in on this? Even if I don't disagree, I don't think issuing a statement is necessarily lobbying per se, but if we start to take positions, I'm not disagreeing with you, this is germane to what we do, but what's in it for us to comment on it? And what could go wrong if we do comment on it? And I don't know, am I the only person who has not read the bill chapter to verse? And I'm certainly not the 2 versions, and so I'm incapable of intelligently telling you which of the 2 versions would be, quote, better for us. I'm clueless.
Josh, I'm in a meeting right now. Can I call you back in a while? Okay. I'm sorry.
So
Fred?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I echo your concerns. How vital is it that we take a position? Does it matter anymore at this point? But I guess it's the House that hasn't voted yet on it. Will it make a difference? And yeah, I'm not well versed on the 2, so I'm not quite sure what I haven't. I had to fight both the Russian and the Chinese revolutions today. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm prepared to say what I think we should support or not. And I don't know how crucial it all is at this point.
Can I just, the other thing, when it comes down to whether or not they're going to be regulated, it really depends on what that regulation means. If it means they're going to issue them a license, will that change what happened to our members last year? Not necessarily, so it really depends on what action they take, or as far as what regulating them means.
And to be pretty blunt about this, and that's precisely why we should have waited. To talk about those very kinds of provisions, to make sure that the legislature is steered in a direction that makes the most sense from the standpoint of our members. But
We should have waited or should
should
not?
have weighed in.
Oh, wait, in, I'm sorry.
But we didn't, and so now I think the question that you both raise is it gonna make any difference, given that we don't know the details sufficiently and haven't had sufficient discussion about it? Does it matter now?
Independent from that question, we have never undertaken a review of the decisions in the process and what led to the way relationships got established and what VHI's role in relationships with TPAs should or should not be. We started in the early process when you were on the board in talking about it, and we were thinking about saying we're gonna choose one TPA, and we were even leaning towards one, because I remember you making a motion, Joel, when we did that, and we ended up deciding not to do that and allowing districts to make their own decisions, negotiate locally, and enter into their own contracts. And we've been very active in monitoring and supporting, in whatever ways we can, resolution of the difficult circumstances that evolved, but we really haven't done an after-action review of what VHI's role should be with TPAs, what it shouldn't be, whether our decision was the right one. And I feel like, and I know, the legislature's rolling along, and it would be nice to have done that evaluation, but I would like to see that be something on the many list of things that we do, is an after-action review of our decisions, processes. We really talked about even saying, if you're gonna be in a VHI plan, and you want a HSA, HRA, you want a medical savings account with that, if you choose us, then you also choose the TPA that we have endorsed, but we didn't do that, but, we
In
should,
the interest of, I understand your point.
I just
and-
want to
and
talk about
is-
it in the future.
And it's a relevant point, but not in this context. The context here is, do we take a position on a piece of legislation?
I know.
And I think the answer by consensus will be, it's too late to bother. That's my sense. That leads to a secondary question is, are we going to repeat this process mistake into the future? Or are we going to undertake an attempt to identify the types of legislative proposals about which it makes sense for VHI to have an opinion rather than to provide testimony and factual background?
Joel, briefly, but I raised two questions. One was, is it too late, which frankly articulated, but I want to make sure with the second point I raised is not lost. There's an axiom in finance, you don't risk a lot to get a little.
Oh,
So what I was saying is, if we wade in, whether it's this statute or some other one, there are pros to doing that and there are cons. We work with the TPA, or you work with the TPA, so let us just say something came out of this legislation that was really bad for them from their point of view, and you're working with them, you see, so I'm asking, what's the worst that could happen, that's the second
well,
question.
for me, very simply, the worst that could happen is the legislature acts in a way that is counter to our interests. And that could very well happen because we have no interest that they are aware of. So, I guess for formality's sake, is there, and there may not be one, but is there a motion to, that the VHI take a position with respect to S41, given where things are in the calendar?
Not from me.
Seeing none, is there a motion that VHI, that the board take up before the fall, the question of the circumstances, if any, under which VHI should, in fact, develop opinions about legislation? Is there a motion to that effect?
Say it again.
That prior to the fall, and I say the fall because of the way the legislative process works, to take up the question of the circumstances, if any, under which VHI shall, I guess, take a position on pending legislation.
I would.
I've asked if there's a motion, there could be, just to get it on the floor, is there a motion to that effect, or shall we just move on?
I would make a motion that we be aware of and decide whether and how we would be we would, I don't know what the word is, what you use for getting,
Take positions.
taking a
Take a
position on new legislation that is related to VHI and services provided by VHI.
Is there a second?
I would, if you say, and there's a process for giving us advance warning,
Of
I
course.
can't
Yeah,
vote credibly on something
That's
that's
fair.
That's, I mean, I.
yeah, and that's my motion, is that we be made aware of
I
any
have to assume,
pending legislation that
I
could
think that's,
affect VHI.
I would take that as implicit and now explicit as a part of the motion. So are you seconding it?
I'll second that.
And if the motion is affirmative, can we just make it, or look at this in the context of our overall annual work plan,
Sure.
Mhm.
rather than having a date certain or a deadline or whatever?
I understand that, and I don't disagree fundamentally, as long as the work plan makes plain that decision, that any protocol or policy we adopt is in place in time for us to give due consideration to legislation in 2020. Is that fair?
Not to me. I think the most
Not to
important things we need to take care of are the day-to-day operations of the organization. And if that needs to happen and we don't get to things that are more visionary and future forward, that may be, I think we have to let the work define our timelines. I also think that a review of the whole TPA arrangement and process should be a high priority, and if I had to
That-
choose
with all
between
due
the two.
respect, I understand that, I don't disagree,
Okay.
but let's resolve this particular matter before we move on
Okay.
to matters not on the agenda.
As a friendly amendment to your motion, if you could,
It's Fred's
I'm sorry,
motion.
Fred's motion, I think you want to put subject to mandate, to, was it not mandated, but subject to the time-sensitive priorities that we have. Meaning, we're not going to consider a piece of legislation at the expense of renewing a crucial contract or something. This is,
Robert,
Yeah, I'm not
I
sure.
don't think that's necessary.
I don't think it's necessary, and I think it could get us into
but we
I
understand.
mean,
a binding
as a practical matter,
matter.
as a
Something that
practical,
has to be resolved will resolve.
as
separate, you
a
know.
practical matter, the board controls what the
Yeah.
board talks about. Well, there's a motion pending, it's been seconded. Is
I
there
didn't have
any
the
fur-
second, I'm sorry, who had the second?
Robert.
Robert. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you. The next item is quite important, and it's been put off several times. I truly think we can get all this done today. So let's move to perhaps a briefer than 20-minute discussion of identifying the work of the board for this year and updating the annual work plan, and if there are any motions to accompany this, let's air them as. Robert, this is, did I skip? What did I skip?
You just talked
I
about
apologize, I
number
meant
nine.
precisely what I didn't. Forgive me, and thank you. Item 8, the meaning of success, a brief discussion of what we want VHI to accomplish. And this is the discussion that we have put off, because it's easy to put it off. And Robert has asked it on the agenda at least once before, and you made it this time.
Thank you.
So I will yield the floor for just an introduction, if you like, and then we can get into it, and if there are any accompanying motions.
Well, I don't have any emotions, it was just, again, my newness has not been greatly diminished, and I'm conscious of the time that the chair alluded to. I'd like to hear from all of us as to what does success mean beyond our formal work plan, and what are we looking at in terms of our fingers, what does the promised land look like for us after X months or a year or whatever. And that may be an ongoing conversation. I appreciate putting it on the agenda for today.
So unless there are motions, then there may very well be ones. My intention is that we cut this off at 4 o'clock and move on to the other matters. So I'm not sure who you'd like to have that. Okay.
I don't have to lead off.
Could be you.
Could be anyone.
You could be a tone setter.
I mean, I'll be happy to get it going. I mean, I feel
Why don't you, because.
successful operation of this board and of this organization, we service our members in a way that addresses their needs and is sensitive to the interests of a range of stakeholders. We respond to regulators. We are, of course, indirectly, we are dealing with a bill that is partially paid by our members, and we have to be sensitive to that, and partially paid for by the taxpayers, so we can't be oblivious to that. And I think we have to be seen to be constantly working to provide the best possible service to our members, given the real constraints that we face. And that's the best we can do.
Can I ask a clarifying point?
A point?
Can you define member, because I just want to make sure that I know
Well,
what you're thinking.
I'm alluding to the actual subscribers,
Thank you.
but also, of course, the school districts are right, through the
It's safe to say everyone's being served by
right,
us.
everyone is being served, and we can't be seen to be ignoring legitimate concerns of any one stakeholder group, though clearly there's a pecking order, and I understand that, but I think to be seen as successful, we have to be seen, all of us, as working towards that overarching goal, while being mindful of interests of many other stakeholders.
Thank you. Technically, member for us is a municipality, and it sounded
I'm
like
sorry.
you were talking subscribers, so I wanted
I
to
He
make
knows-
sure.
he knows better, I'll speak for him.
I don't, thank you, Councilor.
No, we
No,
mix that,
subscribers.
we mix that all the time.
Yeah.
We all do it, and we all do it all the time, so. Any other brave souls? You don't have to be particularly brave to do this. Fran?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that, I mean, it would seem to me, that I guess that's why I agreed to be on the board, was to make sure that we are offering effective, fair, and quality services, healthcare services, to all of our subscribers. Yes, we don't, yeah, subscribers, but that we always be mindful, as you said, so it's affordable and fair to the taxpayers, who are paying most of the bill.
I was thinking about it from a slightly different angle. I was thinking that success would be that highly functioning board, that we get to the point where, you know, for me, it's building a background of knowledge that I need in these areas, but that we reach a level of trust with one another. I think that we respect each other all on different levels, but that we can get to the point of building trust with one another so that we can have productive conversations and go forward. So that's where my head went when you said success, a little different than your explanations, but
I think that's
just a different angle. All leads us to the same place.
I'm never one to avoid offering an opinion. On the trust level, I'll say something that I've said before, and countered it in what Peggy just said. I couldn't agree more that it's absolutely critical that this board, that the members of this board develop a higher sense of trust in one another, particularly in their, with respect to their intentions. B, it is at least as important, probably not more important, so I'll stop it, as important that subscribers and members trust us as well. And you've heard me opine over the last half year that our reputation is not what it needs to be. And my shorthand evidence for that is the number of actions that subscribers have taken to get our attention over the last several years, and the legislature's decision to intrude into the functioning of this organization without one dissenting vote in the State House. They may not be looking at us with a fine-tooth comb, but when they look at us, we need to acknowledge those problems.
can I just add a quick thing? Sure. I'm just saying, but yes, and I'm glad you raised that, but that does not mean we have to agree. We will have disagreements. I think success is we're able to arrive at the point because we voted on a decision-making structure that gives us no choice, where at some point, well, I'll have to take a little bit of water with our wine, and in some instances more water than wine. And then I realize we're a health-related organization, so just to say for the record that moderate alcohol consumption is related to positive health outcomes for people of my age. I only speak for myself.
And obvious personal behaviors.
Right. But in all seriousness, but it does not mean that we will not have disagreements, and at times perhaps strong disagreements on core issues. We are forced to resolve them. And so trust, yes, but I think many organizations, and I speak from many years, decades now, in private industry as well, many organizations have failed when there is a groupthink mentality. It's better to have a healthy tension, to recognize that, put it on the table, and then move forward, and rather than in the interest of avoiding that, and we start submerging core beliefs.
Just for clarity's sake, trust to me does not mean that we all see things the same way.
No, I get it.
It means that we can hear
I agree with
each
you.
person's perspective and we can respond in a respectful way.
That's right.
There was a one-time suggestion that we develop a format or mechanism for airing out issues of trust outside of the form of a sort of a normal business meeting. And I even remember the date, May 18th, having been sort of bandied about for such a gathering. Is there interest in actually following up on that?
Like a retreat day?
Whatever we call it, a retreat thing, yeah.
I recall that, I had it penciled in my book. I would ask, because we didn't act on it, I might have another commitment out of town, such that.
Oh, I'm not talking about May 18th anymore.
As a general point down the road, perhaps, I think we're still working on getting things going. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't know if we need it right now. Maybe we get some more experience in moving things forward.
I would like it sooner rather than later. We talked about it as an educational piece, we talked about it as, just kind of building as a group, building relationships and going forward, but we also talked about some of the background information that we needed. Tracy had spoken very early on about board training, which I think you said the last board recommended, and here we are, almost May, and it hasn't occurred. So that's why I would encourage it to happen very soon, or as soon as possible. With our schedules, it's always difficult, but that's a piece of what we're looking for.
Well, two things, I guess we can come right back to that, but Tracy, you have an opportunity to add your thoughts about success, and I guess I would too.
Yeah, so my thoughts are that we deliver on the success is delivering on the mission that we've agreed to. We have a mission that was revised and revisited several years ago, and we revisited it periodically, and we have been asked by a former board member to relook at the mission and decide. So I would hope that that would be a part of the process for making sure that we're clear about our common definition of success. And to that end, I agree with Peggy that we also need to be a board and an organization that operates well. A high-performing board and a high-performing organization with clearly defined and well-followed roles and responsibilities that help us to deliver on that mission. We spent a lot of time on the mission. We spent several meetings when we first became the Intermunicipal Insurance Association in 2013, and really did effectively use that to guide decision-making into the transition to new plans, and it would be a good time to revisit it, refresh it, breathe new life into it.
Well, let me ask individually, I mean, I don't want to put individuals on the spot, but that's what it always boils down to. Is there any objection, Robert, I understand the notion of sort of, are we ready for a retreat? Personally, I'm ready. Is there anybody who fundamentally disagrees that we actually might benefit by taking a day for ourselves somewhere? You disagree?
No, I don't disagree.
You agree?
I agree, sorry.
You
That's a
listened to
yes.
me. How did I know you listened to me? All right, I'm
I
sorry.
didn't disagree at all.
No, you didn't.
I caught it with
Right,
you,
you were
and
thinking
and actually your definition is making it a little more a working session. It just, when I hear retreat, I think we're gonna go, not that I wouldn't like to do this, but we'll do rope climbing or something to build team building. And there's, you know what I'm saying? You know, it's-
My road climbing days are
No, no,
behind
I'm
me.
just saying, you know, but this is not just us, you know, getting having a beer together, pardon me, again, the booze, sorry.
Now you're talking.
Yeah, yeah, the stuff that really cannot be done in the context of a normal agenda.
Right. Well, we meet in 2 weeks. And we have much to accomplish still before 5 o'clock. So, may we assume that we should include on the agenda in 2 weeks a more fulsome, I guess, discussion about a potential retreat and geez, who knows, maybe even try to schedule it.
I think that's where we got stuck last
Okay.
time.
Well, I
Schedule
know.
was hard.
Now
So we
the-
just gotta get back.
The summer is upon us, and, you know,
Yeah.
my spring travels are over, but my summer awaits and all that kind of stuff. All right, well, we'll come right back to this at the next meeting, and with a view towards fully developing a proposal that we all build together around a retreat. All right? Done. Okay. I'm gonna cede the question of how important is it that we talk about item 9 today in view of the other items on the list. Should we move it to the end?
You mean the former number 9? Oh, sorry, the number
No,
9, yeah, we
number
didn't
9.
agenda. The annual work.
I don't know the answer to the question, nor do I know the question. So I think you're looking at Laura.
Yeah, is the annual work plan, does this need work?
This is where you decide what you're going to accomplish this year so that we can build agendas based on what you want to do.
This goes back to Peggy and my agenda day, when we did the agenda, and we were trying to frame this as a process to make sure that we are mindful of getting all the things that people raised on the plan for the year. We didn't get to it in that first meeting. But that's where this item originated from, was to use the work plan as a framework for at least talking conceptually as a board through the work that we have to do to keep the organization on track, which I think is highlighted,
Okay.
and the work that we want to do to move ourselves
So
forward.
the question is, do we discuss it now? You will remember your initial motion today. We're going to run out of time on matters that have to be dealt with. You are aware of that.
I wasn't saying to discuss it today or not, I was just trying to
Oh.
remind people of what the agenda item was.
Okay, I apologize. Is there a motion to put off consideration of item 9 until May 14th? Probably fits reasonably well within the construct of a retreat discussion.
Forgive me, as long as there's something that is not on fire that we are missing, pardon me, the metaphor.
Just the matter.
I've pulled from that, when we gave you a starting point, Mark, Bobby, Joe, and I, for the agenda, we pulled from that now.
We won't need that for May 14th. We already have a draft agenda, and you and I have to flesh it, and you and I have discussed items that belong on it as well.
I move we table.
All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. last meeting, we ended up left with a decision that required VSBIT and Vermont NEA to submit evaluations of their work under the respective service agreements. We have them, they're both very lengthy, they're each very lengthy. The agenda says that VSBIT's is in the Dropbox, and as I think you may know, Vermont NEA's is also in the Dropbox now. If you can navigate the Dropbox. Okay. Okay.
That's
all.
not
I found it.
Sorry you have trouble, I have given you instructions, I'm happy to meet with people, I don't need you to keep digging at me.
That was,
The third time this week.
yeah, mine didn't dig at Dropbox, it wasn't a dig at you. Any questions about the evaluations themselves? Do they meet the purpose that any individuals had in mind for them? Are they unsatisfactory in any regards? Okay.
Are we gonna talk about them?
But that's what I asked, 2 questions in an attempt to spawn any discussion, if there's discussion.
These I printed out.
Do we wanna take one first? And then the other?
I've asked, are there any comments? If you have a comment, feel free to make it.
Okay.
Which one do we start with?
Is that your comment? Please. We have 59 minutes left now.
So, sorry, there's a big stack of papers and I was looking for my VSBIT
You want a copy?
service agreement with my notes on it, and I'm not getting my hands on it, so. I'll speak to from my recollections on VSBIT, but first as a precursor, particularly as we're discussing concerns that VHI has an obligation or a need to earn trust, re-earn trust and credibility as far as service delivery. I think it's essential that we do a thorough, thoughtful job of evaluating our service providers. My recollection of the VSBIT service contract is that I appreciate 2 things. One, that it's organized in a way that aligns explicitly with the deliverables outlined in the service agreement, which makes it easy for me as someone reading it to understand the evidence that's behind it, that it does list evidence, and the evidence that is referenced is not necessarily recapitulated there, but is referencing things that we as a board saw throughout the past year. And my wondering in particular is because all of you have not been on the board for the full year, you didn't necessarily have the opportunity to review. For example, unless you reviewed, I'm sure when you get the email of the financials, for example, you review that on your own. But we as a board haven't reviewed that formally at a meeting, and you weren't a party to reviewing the last audit, things like that. But historically know that that is a compilation of evidence and information that we are privy to or updated on throughout the course of the year. And that makes a lot of sense to me, and I find that an effective process and affirmation of the service contract.
Any further comments? Robert?
So, we're not really comparing apples to apples because the nature of the respective service contracts is somewhat different. And the format that we receive from Vermont NEA and VSBIT is somewhat different. And different rules.
There it is.
So, I mean, I did know that the report that we received from Jeff Fannin is and this might be the nature of the role you know, it's more qualitative as opposed to the VSBIT report where they point to particular things, but is that, and with the attachment, is that, that's a function of the differences in what we're contracting for.
My guess is it's a function of the meaning of the word evaluation.
Okay. So it's just,
We probably wanted to address their view of the quality of the work they perform. I don't know, that's how I read it. Any other? I mean, there's no action required. The parties have fulfilled their obligation to submit the document.
Can we talk about Vermont NEAs?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I guess I'd like to be explicit that it would be helpful if the evaluation was aligned to the deliverables in the service agreement in the future. I don't know if it's appropriate just to convey that to Mark, or if we should formally convey that. What's the most respectful way to convey that? If it's a note to Jeff Fannin or feedback to Jeff.
Has it ever been conveyed to Vermont NEA before?
Well, Jeff was on the board himself before, so when we had the discussion and gave that feedback, he was here, he's not here today.
This has been the standard format that Vermont NEA has used in the past.
Okay.
It has been, but we also have suggested that it would be more helpful in the past. And I wonder if it would be useful to be more formal in that feedback.
Anything else?
Yes. I continued to have concerns about the full delivery of the terms of service or the services that that VHI contracts with Vermont NEA for. I think the most significant relate to, I don't know if anybody has the service plan handy, number 6 and number 7, where our service agreement with Vermont NEA asks that Vermont NEA educate school and retired employees on the VHI health plan options, current and prospective, to promote awareness and informed plan selection, and provide comprehensive training on support tools developed to assist school employees in making informed health plan choices that balance individual and family utilization needs with risk tolerance. And
So the evaluation doesn't address those items, is that what you're saying? Or are you saying that in
not
spite of the
only-
evaluation, it doesn't reflect performance?
Yeah, not only have we not seen evidence of that work, the evaluation itself cites in several places that employee education is not sufficient and has not met goals or met general standards for what we think is successful in terms of employee education. That's not something we've discussed as a board, what would be the indicators of successful employee education, but I can skim for a few spots where the employee, so for example, at the end of page, second to last paragraph on page 2, it notes that, complaints from employees are that they don't seem to understand how their high deductible health plans are supposed to work. There are a couple of other places where there's assertions that employee education has been not sufficient, and employees don't have the information that they need to make good decisions.
Forgive me, so what is the implication of your comment?
The implication of my comment is consistent with observations I've made in past years that Vermont NEA has not provided evidence of or any evaluation materials, and in fact this year they provided evaluation materials that suggest not only no information but negative information regarding the services being provided around educating employees. And that's super important to me, and I think it should be super important to the VHI board, as that is a responsibility that is the singular, that is unique to our contract with Vermont NEA. My understanding is that historically, as the liaison with employees, the belief was Vermont NEA was best suited to connect with folks, to help them be informed consumers of their health care plans and informed decision makers. And again, this isn't something that we ask VSBIT to do as well. This is something that we ask just Vermont NEA to do. And not only are we not seeing evidence that it's being done, we have assertions that there's problems in this area, in this evaluation.
I had a different read on it. I thought that there was a note that Vermont NEA had been out and working in many districts that were listed throughout. And that was almost overwhelming at times, trying to do the amount of education that was needed.
Seems to me that.
That was my take on
So
it.
there's the juxtaposition between your comment and Robert's comment about the format. So what you're suggesting, I think, is that had Vermont NEA not provided qualitative assessment of the success of its efforts, but rather enumerated merely the quantity of its efforts, you wouldn't have a concern. That's, so that, I can't.
Can I ask if we should be having a full board discussion of VHI's, or Vermont NEA's evaluation, given our current conflict of interest, and that this is fundamental to the renewal of the service agreement?
I'm gonna say this for the camera and any school board people or others who might want, which is, Tracy, you can, unfortunately, have it all ways. You can address the length of the agenda and then contribute to the duration of the agenda. You can require evaluations, and you can require us to discuss those evaluations. And apparently you can also try to terminate discussion of those evaluations. I don't know what it is you want this board to accomplish in this context, but I do know it's confusing, and I would like some clarity. And I guess I really want to terminate the discussion today, because we have the several business items that you pointed out earlier in the meeting need to be taken care of. And we also need to establish a next step with respect to the service agreements. Are there any final comments people have about the evaluation?
May I just say something quickly?
Well, I also want to say that you stood in the way for months of resolving the conflict of interest issue. And so it isn't resolved, and so we can't have this discussion, as far as I am concerned. Mark?
I need
It's
to
a,
respond to that
this is a
one
con-
at a time.
this is a conversation probably that we need to pick up at another time and go into more depth. But if anyone reads the past 3-4 years worth of evaluations, and that would include, in fact, contributions made by Laura before Bobby Joe's tenure, although she is certainly referenced in our evaluations. There is simply no way one could conclude that I was not a central, integral part of a massive statewide education process leading up to the transition to these new healthcare plans. It is simply impossible to draw that conclusion from reading the documentation that's in the record, or talking, in fact, to local union leaders, school employees, and central offices. It is also the case that virtually any time I am dealing with a problem, I am also educating people about their healthcare plans. I did so today, in fact. And you will notice in this year's evaluation that I helped to set up a training in the Northeast Kingdom when there were issues raised by school employees about their healthcare plans and how they were structured and how cost sharing worked. So this education work goes on all the time, and it's also education work that is performed by our UNICEF staff on a regular basis, the same staff whose funding you cut, even though they were a central part of helping to get information out and to deal with the issues that arose from that information. So education on healthcare plans is an ongoing part of my work and that of my colleagues. And it is an obligation that is shared by VSBIT as much as Vermont NEA. It is a joint project. So I used the word baffled earlier today, I'm gonna have to use it again now. I'm truly baffled by the idea that you think we are not, at Vermont NEA, responding to people's questions and concerns about cost sharing or the structure of their healthcare plans. It's something that happens every single day. And it is something that's being done by multiple staff people at Vermont NEA, not just me.
So,
There's no motion pending. My inclination is to move on.
so
Is there any?
I move that we find that portions of Vermont NEA's evaluation reflect satisfactory performance, and the portions related to employee education are unsatisfactory. And I would ask that the board be very attentive to the current bylaws, code of ethics, and conflict of interest, and that folks who are appointed to the board by Vermont NEA recuse themselves from further discussion or vote on that determination unless and until those policies change.
As a matter of law, what you just asked, would deprive the board of quorum.
As a matter of law, it would not.
Fran?
Congratulations. You have managed to push us into a corner that proves that we can't trust members of this board, that you do not trust us, that you are, really have played this whole thing. I'm sorry. I can't support what you're saying because you don't seem to you're not expressing any support for getting things done in a trustworthy way. Amazing, just amazing that you've done this. You've worked hard at negotiating this.
I think a
strategy for
personal
yourself.
attack
Tracy,
is
I'm
not
recognizing
appropriate,
Robert.
and the board should
I think
address
this, it would have been better, I mean, from a literal reading of the policies now, a literal reading, just so you know, that is why we said, let us resolve. And Joel, I'll give you this, you have been pushing to address this since the summer.
Yes, and
This
it
is
has,
precisely
and
why.
I have been obstructed
Well,
every time.
Well,
I think that's
let me
untrue.
just, the reason that we have to address COI is a literal reading of the policies now is, item 8 on the execution policy says, the folks who are appointed by one of the contracting organizations should not be discussing the evaluations.
It
It
doesn't
would
say
have,
that.
well-
It doesn't say that.
it,
It
well,
says you can't, the worst it says is no participation in
In
the service
discussion.
agreement, not in the evaluation.
well, but I'm saying it would have been better to skip this, so I think, to be candid, this particular law was not necessary. Again, I was one who said, let's have disagreements, but this one was not necessary. Let us agree, we have to resolve the COI issue. And once we do, we can intelligently talk about contract renewals. It would have been better to skip this, and our collective blood pressure would have stayed lower.
You and everybody will acknowledge that that's exactly how this agenda was created, so as to resolve the conflict of interest issue before this discussion, right?
Well, yes, but we see it is, we couldn't just do it in the context of a 15-minute vote where we were being asked to vote on motions, which we agreed we were not fully conversant with the ramifications of. So all I'm saying is, the discussion of the review, in hindsight, it would have been better to have skipped. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but, all right, so in the interest of moving things forward, that's all I want to say. But
Yeah, we still have to do the business of the organization, and we intentionally had an April evaluation cycle so that we would have a good foundation for contract renewals. And the last thing I want to say is my intent is, I hear you about the effect that my words and actions are having on individual members of the board, and I'm sorry about that. My intent is to surface the areas where there are questions and concerns and move us toward a place where we can have a clear, transparent dialogue about what our expectations are for service delivery, what evidence would be, what successful evidence would be, so that we can be successful as a board.
You began to make
And an
you began to
organization.
make a motion. You didn't finish the motion. My request is that you withdraw the motion and enable us to move on. Peggy?
I was just noting that in the board annual work plan, that it says April to June to review these. And so I would propose versus, I don't know if it's a formal motion, that we settle the conflict of interest on May 14th and that we then pick up these issues after that, once we're all set.
The contract actually says April, the service agreement itself.
Okay, so it wasn't specified in here.
No, that was just by quarter.
Robert's
So-
taking a
Whoa.
lot of space.
Welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Welcome, you're gonna be happy you came.
Yeah, I'm.
All right.
My goodness.
My motion
therefore-
hasn't been seconded, so I'll just withdraw it.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yes, you may.
a comment was made about retirees and
Yes, I
education.
heard that.
There's a section on page 3 that speaks to education efforts by Vermont NEA staff, myself, informing and helping retirees with their plans. I do 9 to 10 workshops every year and half of the past 15, so I would like the record to show that there is no lack of education with retirees,
And is
as
that,
well as my active employees.
is that for members who are retiring?
That is for any active employee and spouse who wants to come learn about VI health plans and Medicare and pension systems.
If I'm not wrong, and I'm not, I've been at some of those. I think, Laura, have you been at some of those?
No,
What do you
because
think?
they're,
Okay.
Mark's doing them on behalf of Vermont
Yes,
NEA, they're
I-
not the high school.
But we did have a board meeting where I brought the materials in and we had a long
Absolutely.
conversation about it. This board's been long familiar with those education efforts.
And Mark, am I right that you work hand in glove with staff of the treasurer's?
That is
office
correct,
every
for
year?
16 years.
That's all, huh?
There's only one person who's been on this board for a long time.
Well, you're aware of those workshops.
I remember reviewing one and I remember giving feedback.
No, not just
about
review, it's been in my
one
evaluations every year.
Is a narrative, there's no evidence, there's no information about how many
So
people are
it's,
served.
so it's the quality of the document, not the quality of the service.
I don't know because I don't have any
That's right.
artifacts.
Over 300 people
Exactly
attended the
right.
workshops this year.
That's exactly right, but you did not say the evaluation document does not provide evidence.
Yes,
You
I
s-
did.
You know, you said it didn't have it.
I did not say that, I said there's no evidence. And I did say generally that employee education is substandard as is specifically
Well, I'm not
referenced in
evaluated
this
by you.
document.
Where is, forgive me, I'm gonna ask, where do we find the actual service contracts? in there?
So if you go on the website, down the bottom, it says membership. So at the very bottom right-hand corner, I think it's a blue tab. And if you go to membership, both service agreements are on the
Okay, thank you.
website. You're welcome.
I'm sorry, I need a bathroom break. You can keep going without me, or if other people need a break. I know we have stuff.
We're not taking breaks anymore.
Okay. As you need them.
Well, we have to skip the rest of item 10, which is next steps, because we haven't got it. We'll come back to that too, after the conflict of interest issue is on May 18th, May 14th, excuse me. Agenda development, this is a redundant or a repeated item, and I'm not sure there's anything to discuss other than, I don't know, it's here. We have a protocol. Is there anything to develop the agenda? Is there a concern about it? We're not gonna be able to comply with it for this next meeting because we have to develop something 2 weeks in advance. Or you looked like you wanted to say something.
Well, I didn't understand what the item meant when the two of you gave it to me, and I
Oh.
didn't have time to
Well,
interpret
then-
it. However,
Yeah.
I had asked at the prior meeting for confirmation, so I submitted it again, that the agenda protocol represents what you
Got
want.
it, I see.
And I didn't know if that's what you meant or something different.
No, I-
So I left it in because you
I got it,
provided
I
it.
got it. I got it.
The only thing I will say, and I did not inflict this on, Joel was a sport and Laura was a sport, I inflicted on them multiple Excel files, which, in other words, to make sure that the template that you sent us and the board parking lot and whatever else was captured. And so we had various iterations of saying, I do this for my benefit, just to make sure, I mean, I could add up the minutes and stuff. But that was probably more involvement, given my ability to get things to be very confusing than I wanted. So I just, in the spirit of this, what I was thinking is, and I think we had it on here, this might not have been the reason it was on originally, but to make sure Laura, in consultation with Mark and Bobby Joe, would develop the agenda, could send us a more developed draft, and then we would review it and make amendments, as opposed to me putting something, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so let me just suggest that the protocol itself is fine, Laura, I think, as far as I can tell from people in the room, and that how we get there is probably best left for the three of us to worry about, unless Tracy would like to insist that the full board be involved. I don't think that would be the case.
In other words, does that make sense? If what I was thinking is.
So we've already developed, Mark and Bobby Joe and I already developed in May and June agendas to give
We
to
have,
you.
we have, oh, at least in that.
Where the goal is that we pull off of that work plan and any issues that arise and put them
That's
in
right.
here,
And then it's up
and
to us
then
to
you
flesh it out.
finesse it.
Understood. No,
All right.
I think that works.
And I'll get on
If
the
it's- if it proves that it doesn't work, we'll figure that out as we go. I think the minutes should reflect the above and beyond degree of loyalty that Martha Gagne has shown to them by leaving whatever miserable activity she had to engage in finances locally and attend this meeting for the final 40 minutes. Thank you, Martha. All right, we're down to the several management action and discussion items. I think we will forego the discussion items and move straight to the action, which includes A, B, C, which may resolve into a discussion, in a short one, C, E, and F, if I recall, the earlier motion. So, we've been provided, and I'll yield the floor, we've been provided with pharmacy formulary change information before. And I'll yield, other than to suggest that the agenda actually reflect January 1st, 2020, rather than 2010.
I didn't even notice.
I just spotted that. We've had it for weeks, we've had this
I
thing.
marked it, and I said there's something about
It
2010.
can't possibly move into the 20s, I just go back.
Right, exactly. Okay, so I will yield the floor, I presume, Laura, to you about.
No, actually, I
Oh,
think Mark,
forgive me.
Mark is the best person.
Okay, Mark.
So you all have this lovely document, the table that Bobby Joe put together. She and I have been doing a lot of work on this, and of course Laura's always in the loop. The last time we talked to you about the National Preferred Formulary in the Credo, there were certain numbers that were missing from the equation because we hadn't yet received them from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. They were particular to, or specific to retirees, Bobby Joe, if memory serves. We now have all the numbers we need, and they are reflected in that table. And we feel strongly, as a management team, that we should move forward as an entity and move to the National Preferred Formulary, as well as to the Accredo Specialty Network. Bobby Joe and I have been working with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont, and recently with ESI, the Express Scripts, our pharmacy benefits manager, to begin laying the foundation for this change. The cumulative savings annually are in the neighborhood of $2.4 million, again, as you can see from the table. We are confident that the move to this formulary, which is a national, truly a national formulary, it is the formulary, you'll recall, of state employees, active and retired. It's also the formulary for Blue Cross's exchange business and a fair number of their large clients. So we are not, if you will, being pioneers in this regard. This road has been well laid before us, and we're confident that this formulary will deliver some true savings that will allow us to police, if you will, the admission of pharmaceuticals to this formulary that may be far more expensive, and that expense may not actually reflect their medical efficacy. And we also believe there are protections built into the system so that if there are members who need a drug that is not on the formulary, they have a way of applying for that through what's called a benefit exception process. And from what Blues tell us, in most cases, when that benefit exception is requested, it is honored. So we think we've met the medical needs of our members. We think it's a fiscally responsible thing to do. And we believe it gives us another mechanism for policing our formulary in concert with the Blues and ESI and also with Remedy. And this move, both of them in fact, got the thumbs up from our analytic consultants at Renly, our pharmaceutical consultants at
So,
Renly.
so if I understand it right, a motion is in order for VHI to adopt, as you say in the first paragraph of your memo to us, to adopt the National Preferred Formulary and Exclusive Specialty Network
So moved.
for VHI's active subscribers with coverage effective January 1st, 2020.
Yes, and it would apply as well to the retiree system. The retirees are willing to move in this direction, provided that we move in this direction for the actives.
With that understanding, should that be in the motion, or what do you guys think?
Well, being that it says active, you
Yes.
might wanna say both.
It's
Yeah.
Why
technically
don't we
our
just say it's-
decision,
yeah,
So what
although
if we
we,
just say subscribers?
Subscribers would be
Cover
fine,
everybody?
that would be fine.
Just
All right,
remove
so the
that.
motion would read to adopt the National Preferred Formulary and Exclusive Specialty Network for VHI subscribers with coverage effective January 1st, 2020. Is
I
there
move this.
Second.
Tracy and Peggy? And any comments?
Well, just quickly, so you use the word members, you meant subscribers in your table, the third column, impacted VHI active members.
Yeah, it says leftover from my lacrosse days.
Okay.
We told you we do it
That's
too.
members.
That trend, if we
Yes,
have.
that is
up-
actual dependents,
We-
that's subscribers and dependents is members to.
So if we were to say, what is the, if someone were to say, well, we're saving 2.4 million, could that translate into reduced premiums? What would you divide the
course.
2.4 million into? Is it the number of subscribers? Is it 40,000? What's the denominator?
It wouldn't necessarily correlate like that specifically.
Okay.
The impact for the active population and their dependents is going to be substantially higher than it would be for visitors, because a much smaller population of people in visitors are impacted by these changes.
Right.
And we don't mix anymore.
Right.
But,
Right,
but
so-
to your point, yes, we should be able to recoup some savings in premium as a result of
Okay.
So if there's
this. Or
not-
mitigate premium increases,
Yes,
maybe that's a
okay.
better way to put it.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify. Okay, just
Correct.
asking. Thank you.
Any other comments before we move on to the
I
next
have two
item?
questions.
Yes.
One is it speaks to your work to identify the insured who will be affected by this and need education. Who's doing the
The
education?
education work is being done by Bobby, Joe, and I primarily, again, with Laura's support. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont's pharmaceutical shop, and Allison Plant, our account manager, and Bobby, Joe, and I had a conference call this week with, was it this week or last week? Last week, with Express Scripts, our pharmacy benefit manager, to coordinate educational materials. So Bobby, Joe, and I have already drafted letters with a VHI tone and character that borrowed information from Express Scripts, but put it in our own way of communicating with our members. Those letters will be going out to our members on day 90 before the transition and day 30. And we've also agreed with Express Scripts that we will give our members a heads up on the Accredo Specialty Network in September, so that they know they're gonna be getting emails and a letter and a welcome call from Express Scripts about the Accredo change.
Okay,
So the education component here is being coordinated between 3 different entities,
yeah.
and it's underway.
And that's going, sorry.
Is it, there was a second, is there any further, oh, I think we have to, provide Martha somehow.
So is that gonna be mailed directly to the subscribers, or is that gonna go through the school network?
No, so we're gonna target those individuals who are affected by the change,
Okay,
right? Because it's a relatively small number of people in our universe of 42,500 lives. And especially with the Accredo people, it's 200 some lives. These are folks with very complex conditions, and we wanna make sure that they understand what this transition means. And they also have to authorize the transition.
and so for everybody else, it's just gonna be like, if I go to my pharmacy, I'm just gonna keep going to my pharmacy, I'm not gonna really see any difference?
That is correct.
Okay,
Annually, there will be changes to these formularies. I mean, we'll be apprising people of those changes and how to navigate, if you will, the new formulary.
We're bumping up against 10 minutes on this.
So we have to put this in our benefit description documents, our certificates of coverage. We have to file with DFR, which we'll do in the next few weeks. They technically have to approve those before it's final. They will, because they've approved it for Blue Cross's book of business in the state, but, they have to go through that review process. We will do it, so that we will, when we have those done, we will do a communication of what are the big things that are new in the BDD. One of them will be these formulary changes. And there will be a change in the National Preferred Formulary for diabetic strips. Many people will be having to change their strip manufacturer, and they'll be getting a free meter to use those new
Accommodate the new
strips. So there'll be communications around those as well.
This won't be a campaign monitor necessarily kind of approach, but, and the booklet, as Laura noted, as well as the BDDs will all be referenced.
So in the interest of time, I have a question, but I don't want an answer today. How's that? So it's my understanding, and so maybe at a future meeting, when we review our prescription monitoring overall, it's my understanding that National Preferred Formulary is a subsidiary of Express Scripts.
Yes.
And so I just would like to understand, and we have Remedy that's supposed to be looking over us to make sure we're getting the best deal possible. I would appreciate a re-review of the processes that we have in place and a better understanding of why we weren't already getting the best deal from the company that we contract with. Don't have to answer now, but could we have, especially since there's newer board members that may not have been through the evolution of Remedy, it would be great for more information.
I'm happy to go to that more, Mike, but I do have to say that the switch to the National Preferred Formulary does not mean you are not getting the best services from Remedy that you contracted for.
Well,
And we can go into that in more
that's what I
detail
wanna
the next time we
understand,
talk.
because
But
somebody
don't, I would
will
not
ask me.
conflate those two things.
Yeah, I need to
At the
know.
risk of preempting people, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? The next item says, act on potential participation in cross-state examination of prescription costs. I'll yield first after I say my piece to Mark and then to Laura, because the materials indicate that we have competing views about this. This boils down to me, after reviewing them both, to a basic question I can't resolve myself, which is what is the harm of proceeding to determine if it's practical to participate in this particular. Mark?
I don't think there's any harm in us participating in this study. I also have to say, I just realized in looking at these documents that went out to you, 2 points on the second page of my,
It's missing.
is missing.
I got 1 and 3.
I just tried to print it, so we'll see.
Well, that would explain, that would explain.
I have it in mind,
I don't have it
I
anymore.
don't have
so, I'm sorry.
it. My copy is off the.
Yeah, in my version, there's a second page missing.
Does anybody else not have
Well,
page
I will
two?
make copies of the.
Everybody
Well,
will
actually,
know.
Bobby Joe, you stay, because the person you haven't heard from is Bobby Joe. You can read my memo, so I'll copy this and you can.
So as Laura photocopies with her permission, there is no harm in us undertaking the study. This is an invitation, as you can see from the memorandum I sent you, from the Wisconsin Education Association Trust. It's also an invitation to the Michigan Education Special Services Association. Both of these entities are VSBIT entities. They've been in existence, each of them, for 5 decades. Michigan serves approximately 200,000 school employees, active, retired, and dependents. Wisconsin serves about 50,000 school employees, active, retired, and dependents, and 50,000 state employees. The study was presented to us as an opportunity to do a cost-benefit analysis to see what kind of savings and other benefits might accrue from forming a large pharmacy collaborative with these other 2 entities. The study is a no-commitments study. By that I mean, regardless of the findings of the study, as it's been presented to us, VHI and or Mesa, or Wisconsin for that matter, can choose to walk away at the end of the day. The Wisconsin Trust has been told by its pharmaceutical consultant that there may be as much as $7 million of savings annually just for Wisconsin. And Wisconsin ideally, if all went well and the study came back with positive results and all 3 parties were in league and wanted to move forward, would ideally like to see something like this move forward on January 1 of 2021. It's not carved in stone, but that was an ideal date that Vaughn Vance from Wisconsin shared with us in our conversations with him. So again, you don't have page 2, so I won't speak to all of the details on that, but it seems to me that this is a very unique special opportunity. It will cost us nothing financially. Wisconsin has agreed to fund the total cost of the study, which is estimated to be about $60,000. What it needs from us is 1 year of claims data that will be transferred confidentially, taking all precautions as we have done in the past, most recently with Altarm and before that Remedy. Transferring RX data to Milliman, 1 year's worth, under a BAA agreement, and then allowing Milliman to do the study in accordance with whatever guidelines are presented, and waiting to see what the results are. And when those results come back, we can ascertain whether or not it makes sense for us to enter into further conversations and or negotiations with Wisconsin and Mesa, assuming both are still involved, and decide from there whether it is in our self-interest to build this thing or to walk away from it. I don't know, to be quite honest and frank, I don't know what this study will show. But I am very intrigued by the fact that Wisconsin believes that maybe $7 million may accrue in savings to it, simply by leveraging the kind of bargaining power that comes from a collaborative with 300,000 people in the mix.
Now, we would need half our the state population to participate.
And given what we're looking at,
on
in terms of pharmaceutical spend going forward, and you can see that referenced on page 2, under why this opportunity is timely and makes sense. Given the ongoing efforts by the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System to lower its costs without compromising access to care and lower its liabilities. Given the fact that pharmacy cooperatives like this for educational employees already exist in Kentucky and Ohio, and Vaughn Vance has talked to staff people with both of those entities. And also in light of the fact that our legislature and our governor signed a law into effect that would permit the importation of less expensive medications from Canada in an effort to control the exorbitant spend we have right now on pharmacy. I see no downside to just doing the study, and as you've read from the memo, I am more than willing to be the point person in making sure all the dots are connected, everything is done above board and fully done in accordance with everything that needs to be done to protect the confidentiality of data. So I would really urge us to sort of take advantage of this opportunity and see what it yields, see what it tells us. And if nothing's there that's worth pursuing, nothing has been lost except a little bit of time arranging for a transfer of 1 year's worth of RX data.
If we were to do this, feeding off of what I think I understood from Laura's memo, participating in this examination does not foreclose participating in any other, it's sort of like an RFP.
You didn't read that in my memo.
Oh, it doesn't matter, I misunderstood. That's my question, though. It doesn't intrude into our capacity to explore other avenues.
No.
Okay, that's really what I meant. Laura, or did you?
Why
want
don't you
to
do
yield to
Bobby Joe, but then I
Jones?
would like to make a
Bobby
comment.
Joe, do you have a document?
Yeah, I apologize, I didn't send it earlier, I just looked up this morning, so have something official, to kind of guide my thoughts. And I respect where Mark is coming from, and I certainly wish that there was, some fat in the pricing, so to speak. But I know that, you know, the proposal, is that they'd have about, 300,000 members. I think it'd, be about 285,000. I do believe Blue Cross is somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 with theirs right now, members, so there's not a big disparity between the two entities as far as how many members they have. And the president and CEO of Blue Cross has told us that they have a guarantee from Express Scripts to have the best prices in Vermont. And if they think they don't, he is on the phone with them to make sure that they do. Our current PBM that we use, Express Scripts, is the biggest PBM in the nation. And we currently hire Remedy, who's done amazing work the last few years, to the tune of $500,000 and $525,000 per year to be sure that we have the lowest rates. And part of kind of getting back to Tracy's point earlier, the change to the National Preferred Formulary helps us even get more rebates available to us by slimming down the network. I think Wisconsin said they had a potential savings of $7 million, but I think we have better contracts, we have a better PBM, and we have Remedy helping us already. My biggest concerns are that we're kind of doing it for naught, that we're not going to find any savings. We've got a lot of projects happening and we just need to kind of have a thoughtful, planned approach to all of our projects. I get concerned about how many entities we send our PHI to. Anytime you enter a new BAA or a business associate agreement, that's one more entity that has your data. And regardless, if you're an AIDS patient, if you're, there's a few different things that you don't want your information out. So a data breach could be really disruptive for us and for our members. And then I do think it does cause some disruption with Blue Cross and could have some downstream impacts to administrative costs if we were to actually pull away from Blue Cross. Some reporting and then kind of the health initiatives that we have going with them as far as our PATH programs and such, that we need both the medical and the pharmaceutical data to be tied together. So those are just the concerns that I raised from my perspective.
Laura.
So, what I told Mark was I thought it was premature to bring it to this meeting. I think that when we talked to Vaughn on the phone, he said he had no particular deadline. He even said he could spend his money in the next fiscal year, so that he was looking for people who wanted to partner with him. I felt like we had breathing room and we needed breathing room. I think to even to ask Blue Cross to send, we haven't asked Blue Cross about their capacity to send data. When could they do it? How long would it take? When we send the signal to Blue Cross that we're interested in possibly carving out our pharmacy, which is what this would be, and moving away from them, we are changing a fundamental tenet of VHI, which is to be partnered with Blue Cross. I think that's something that should be discussed at a retreat as part of our mission, as part of the big picture. And I also have to say that I didn't understand why Mark had to have it on this agenda. We just met on the opportunity report with Altarum a couple of days ago, and I thought that was an important piece to have and digest, and sort of how do all of these possible ideas fit together. You just took a big step to move to the National Preferred Formulary. You are active, we are active in the formulary arena. And I have to say, last night when I saw for the first time that the Vermont NEA has instructed through the resolution process to engage in this, I felt deceived, because I had the conversation with Mark that, hey, I got a call out of the blue with an invitation for VHI. I was not aware that the Vermont NEA was pursuing this at the same time. So I feel that this project should be vetted with more time to understand the implications and where it fits in your mission and our work.
Biting my tongue at the use of the term deceive.
There is absolutely no deception here. I get together with Vaughn Vance once a year, every summer, to talk shop. He and I are on conference calls periodically.
But why did I
Laura,
not
can I
know?
finish my comments, please? The idea of pharmacy cooperatives, other measures that any trust like ours can take to save money for school districts and school employees is always on our agenda. We've talked about this kind of thing for 2 or 3 years. It's never come to anything because nobody took the initiative to make it happen. I certainly didn't have the wherewithal to do it. This board hadn't authorized it. Vaughn calls me and says, I think I got the funding. Are you interested? I said, yes, I'm interested. Let's set up a call. The Vermont NEA conversations around healthcare reform and other measures, those are on an entirely different track. So there is no deception here.
But
There
the
is a,
track
no,
just
please,
comes together.
please,
Laura, stop.
please. This is a good faith effort to bring before this board an opportunity to study whether or not there might be potentially millions of dollars in savings for school districts and school employees. Right? That's what's on the table. With no cost to us financially, with a minimal amount of work in terms of transferring data. Of course, we always transfer private health information in the most careful and legal ways. We have done this for years. We just transferred from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont to Altarum 3 years worth of medical and RX data. We did it with Remedy. We are doing it with Remedy right now. Remedy gets our claims on a monthly basis and has for the last 4 years. Laura and I arranged for the transfer of data to the state when it was looking at the implications of the excise tax. We have transferred data to the state of Vermont to look at our pharmacy costs when they were looking at the drug importation bill. So we have routinely done this, and we've done it in a very careful and thoughtful way. This study, as I said, may not yield any fruit. And if it doesn't, we're done talking about it. But if it points us in a promising direction, then we have an opportunity as a board and as a staff to sit down and say, is this worth it? And if it is, what would it take to achieve it? I'm not worried about disrupting the relationship with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. They receive an awful lot of money from us every year under contractual terms. And if we believe something that's in the benefit is to the service of our members, it's different from what's in the contract today, we have a fiduciary and an ethical responsibility, in my opinion, to explore that. So, and I also want to say, I'm not convinced the 220,000 number here is correct in terms of what Blue Cross, I actually said to Bobby Joe in an email recently that I wanted to double check that figure, but even if it is, what is the harm in seeing if we can leverage savings for our members? And that, when I say members now, I mean school districts and I mean subscribers. What is the harm of seeing what the potential is for that?
I want a larger discussion, but I, for one, am tired of hearing innuendo and direct assertions of duplicity. If you have evidence about it, and you want to raise it in the form of a complaint, please, give it to me, or if it's about me, give it to Robert. And let's try to refrain from characterizing behavior.
I realize time is short, and I would say, as a general point, we're all in favor of looking at ways to reduce expenses. That said, my concern is why now we don't have the Altarum report, number one. Secondly, you mentioned a financial benefit to our subscribers. But frankly, we have to have a bigger discussion, because if this plan is predicated on drug importation,
It's not.
okay?
It has nothing to do with drug importation.
You mentioned.
No, I said the Senate and the House and the
Okay.
governor
Authorized.
authorized that
So-
law. This is completely different.
I would just say, in the same reason I said this in response to Joe's COI modification, or S41, I don't feel sufficiently, though I agree with the general principle, who would disagree with that? I don't feel sufficiently comfortable to advocate. The three of you are busy. It's a bandwidth issue for me. At this point, I'm not comfortable. I don't feel that there's necessarily, that you have the capacity or should have, take on this extra thing. The benefits are so nebulous for me, I don't feel I'm making an informed vote with respect to
So
what.
who's gonna do the work?
I said I would do the work. Robert, all the work is at this stage is preparing for the transfer of claims to Milliman under the terms of the BAA. That's our obligation in the under this particular study proposal. If there's nothing else to do, if this study comes back and it's not promising, or it leads us in a direction we're not comfortable with, the real work, if it happens, would come post-study, not preparing for the study.
And we make decisions accordingly. I have a potential motion.
I want to reiterate, I told Mark it was premature to bring it to this meeting. I did not say that it wasn't something we should pursue. I said we should get more information, we should put it in the context of our work, we should look at it, we should first talk to Blue Cross, and we should have all our ducks in a row before we bring a recommendation to the board.
Okay, I agree. And in fact, I don't know how this emerged, but the motion that I drafted seems very consistent, Laura, with what you just said. So I'm gonna read it, it's about 100 words, I don't have copies, we can get them. I move regarding potential VHI participation in the proposed collaborative study of pharmacy costs. One, that VHI obtain from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont the following information regarding A, the amount of time it would take for it to transfer 1 year's worth of claims data to Milliman. B, regarding the modifications of our contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont needed if VHI decided in the future to enter into the pharmacy collaborative study. And C, the potential for disruption in our relationship with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont to acknowledge Bobby Joe's point. Secondly, that the staff report to the board at its May 14th meeting the information provided by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. And three, that the board include in its May 14th meeting agenda acting on whether to authorize VHI participation in the proposed pharmacy collaborative study. That latter date, of course, is subject to change, but just to get things moving along, that seems to me to accommodate the underlying purpose of the proposal, which is simply to gather information to see if there's something worthwhile for our members, broadly defined, and yet at the same time acknowledge some of the practical impediments about which we simply don't have sufficient information to act today. Denise, is there a second?
Can you run through them quickly, like just the gist of it? I know what we have, Blue
Time to-
Cross Blue Shield, time to transfer data, find out what that is. I know, so what was your B part? I'm just trying to,
I
If there's one,
apologize, I
try now.
didn't recognize how this might play out. What's your specific?
what was one B?
Okay. One A was the time it would take to get the data to Newman. B was the modifications of our contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont needed if VHI decided in the future to enter into this collaborative study. And then there was a C, which was the
Possible
about
disruption
the
to the relationship.
potential for some disruption or other, which I won't characterize. Yeah, Laura?
I think it's very unlikely we'll have that information by May 14th. I also think that we don't need a motion to know what next steps we need to do before we bring you a proposal.
Well, that's fine, but I made a motion.
I understand it hasn't been seconded yet.
Yeah,
I'll second it.
now there's a second. You don't, I don't really care if we accomplish this differently. But what, is there a commitment being made to fulfill the purposes of the motion? Or, you have to help me, what, yeah, forgive me.
So
Yeah.
I think
I
it's
forgive you
premature
for-
for the board to act until you have all the information you need. At no time did I think that this conversation was done. We have more work to do, and we need to get that work done. I can't guarantee you on what timeline, but I
Okay.
can tell you we don't have a deadline either. I'm not gonna stall, but we have some things that have to happen before the end of the fiscal year.
Right, okay. So, Mark, you're looking like.
Well, I think a conversation, trying to meet Laura halfway here, I think a conversation can happen with the Blues relatively soon about the claims issue. That's not a complicated conversation about how long it would take them to transfer a year's worth of RX claims to Millman. Provided, obviously, it had proper direction, and Von Vance of Wisconsin will take responsibility for that. The second question of what would need to change in the contract for us to, if we chose to do a pharmacy collaborative, or if we didn't, and somewhere down the road, we wanted to carve out the pharmacy. This is a conversation we actually had with Remedy in the past, but they inquired of us whether we were interested in doing it. So, again, I don't think that's a really long conversation either. The question of disruption, I'm not quite sure how to frame or structure that conversation, but certainly that's something the management team can give thought to. I think it's almost an implicit point in when you begin talking to people at Toulouse about contracts. So I don't think these are long conversations.
I think we have to do this in a very thoughtful way.
Well, of course.
This is not a normal course of business to ask Blue Cross to help us look to carve out pharmacy. So,
But,
you have a motion on the table, and we have several other items that have to be acted on.
And I have to leave right at 5.
Blue Cross Blue Shield though,
Martha.
they are, they're working for us, and it's our data, correct?
Correct.
So just,
Yeah, they
So-
will do it, it's just the amount of time it takes, and it's not going to be Blue Cross that does it, it would have to be ESI.
Right,
Which is gonna
but-
add a.
But we can,
okay.
we've done that before with Remedy. We've crossed that bridge many times.
So assuming the motion, but for the deadline, saying is an appropriate statement of the work plan for the staff. Is there any particular objection to it? We just
I wouldn't vote for the motion.
You're about to leave.
No, yep, but I would vote for the motion.
Well, it was second, and I was gonna say it was redundant if the three of you understand what had to be done.
I don't see a clear understanding in the room.
I think that shows we have more work to do on our side before we come back to you.
But that's not what the motion reads, right? It specifies information to obtain. I don't understand the objection, so if you can articulate the specific objection.
I think you're micromanaging.
I call the question.
Is it too late for anybody to know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
It is
just
too
called
late?
the question.
No,
Oh, I called the question, sorry.
here's the thing, we don't have rules, remember? I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm be happy to comply with rules, but that's not a rule in this room that I'm aware
It's a rule in the meeting law
of.
and
No, it isn't.
Robert's rules.
That's true.
Which
But
applies
Robert's
to
rules-
municipalities, right?
Right.
Unless we adopt something else.
And then make a separate motion after you vote on Joel's motion.
Could we engage an audit firm so you can comply with DFR and
So that
adopt
was
an
really
imposition
important.
policy so we can set rates? Because that has to get filed with DFR and extend the temporary
Laura,
position to help
I
people.
understand what you're trying to do.
I'm trying to help Tracy get out at 5 o'clock.
It's 5 o'clock.
I know.
But if we
There's
call
a
the
motion,
question, should there be
there's a
vote?
motion here.
Should be.
There's a motion to call the question. I don't know where it leaves us with respect to this item, other than, I don't know what happens. Is anybody authorized to do anything to advance the work presented in this proposal?
We're not prohibited to
I
advance the
didn't
work.
ask that. I asked if you're authorized.
So yes, we're authorized.
All right, the second question is, will you do it?
Of course, we're undergoing it right now. I can't tell you on what time frame. It has to be put in the context of all of our work. That's why I thought it was premature, if you read my memo. I
I
didn't
did
say
read
it
your
wasn't
memo.
a proper approach. I said I thought it was premature to bring to the board to act.
Well, Mark, if you know, I'm sorry, is there a time frame within which, if we were to proceed, it is
Well,
important?
again, Vaughn said ideally, if everything went according to plan, and everybody was on board, and the study came back a certain way, he saw January 1 of 2021 as a possible start
Okay,
date.
it's-
So that would mean that you'd have to get the data to Milliman reasonably soon, again, assuming Mesa's in this too, right? And then we're gonna spend, 2020 building this. If the board believes that's the approach and the study
And we will not.
supports it, yeah. We'll know once the study's back. The study won't take a long time to get.
So I feel, to be blunt, like I'm being, that we're mincing words. And I don't understand the extent to which the staff intends to follow through on the items listed in this.
Lauren, Bobby Joe, would you be comfortable with us having a conversation in May with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont about two issues? How long it would take them to transfer claims and the contractual piece, what the contractual piece, would have a conversation in
Would we
May?
need a contractual piece though, just to do the study?
No, we don't, but the issue has been raised about what contractual, I think it's premature to have the discussion about the
motion
contract.
because it's in Laura's memo, I
Right,
think.
right, but we're having a conversation about changing a contract when we don't even know if we need to. But that aside, if you're comfortable with, in some time in May, having a conversation with Blue Cross about those two issues, then I'm comfortable with the three of us moving forward without the motion in question.
Well, we need some statement to that effect,
Yeah.
we can move on. I don't know that Bobby Joe can answer, you can.
I'm not sure what kind of statement you need, and I'm not sure why you're spending so much time on this item that doesn't have a strict deadline.
That's not the question, Laura. We know it doesn't have a strict deadline, we've accomplished
So
that.
Mark and Bobby Joe and I meet every single week, and this is on our item, and we will talk about what the next steps are in this. That is our job, and we absolutely will advance that.
And can we expect a report on May 14th to that effect?
Not necessarily.
I don't know,
asking you.
I don't know what kind of information, well, that's 2 weeks away.
So
But certainly by June, you will have a much more fleshed out recommendation from us. I think in 2 weeks is a little unrealistic, honestly.
Okay, that's fair. If we can get this into discussion in a serious way by June, I'm okay with
So I'm gonna voice an expectation that I think we have, which is that with respect particularly to the amount of time it would take to obtain the transfer of 1 year's worth of claims data, we will hear from the staff sometime in June. It may be that you don't know.
We'll absolutely give you a full update at the June meeting.
Okay, with
Has the
that,
motion been withdrawn?
Peggy, I assume you won't mind if I withdraw
Not
the
at all.
motion? The motion is withdrawn.
Thank
Robert, is that all right? I
Yes.
realized you
Done.
were sort of jumped over there.
No, let's keep moving.
All right, okay. Do we really have to act on engaging the audit firm today?
You do.
I move that we engage the audit firm.
I second.
So the audit, if I can speak to it, the audit firm is something that if you want to change the process, the VSBIT contract is where you change it, because it's through VSBIT that you get the audit. The VSBIT board has been open for the last 15 months to think about audit, whether you select the firm together, whether you go on your own. That conversation has been delayed until such time as VSBIT has that conversation with you, and they are happy to do so. You need to engage the firm as your current service agreement allows in order to meet deadlines. We can't hold the audit firm's week without a contract.
Okay, there's a motion to engage. What's the
It's
firm
Sullivan
name?
and Powers.
Sullivan and Powers, that's right.
It's a $400 increase from the prior year, so $20,400.
Sorry.
It was flat the last 2 years.
All right, is there a second to Tracy's motion?
I don't know, I seconded it.
Martha, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
The chair can sign that.
Item 12E is action on the health integrated net position policy, which we discussed back in January.
I move approval as presented.
Second.
So, we have not changed it since you last saw it. You can, because it's your policy, change it again in the future. This is a new thing to all of us. The reason that we want your action today is we want to file it with DFR. It gives them time to possibly have some questions for you, and you be able to answer them by your June meeting, which is already on the books. It's important that we have a policy before they look at the rates for FY '21, which we'll file in August, because it gives you more flexibility in your rate setting process.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Skip the rest of it.
We've been asked to extend, I presume, the duration of our temporary employees' employment because it was impossible to expect that he would be able to resolve all the work that was dumped on him.
I think it was more than we had anticipated.
Yeah, so briefly, can you provide some numbers for us?
I actually haven't updated, there was one in the, meeting minutes, but, we've received 231 requests for help. He's resolved 15 at this point. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it took a long time to really get set up between, it's just an updated number, between, DataPath and Ken getting access to their system. And then even when he had access, he didn't have access to kind of their old system, so it's been kind of a process, but he's got a pretty good rhythm going at this point, we think. He has been able to help folks get reimbursed $10,000 for the 15 people, and not all of them received reimbursement. Some of them, it was just saying to them, you did get your money and this is why. So
You shed a lot of light with his darkness.
yeah, he has to, for all these 231 people, he's had to requests information from Blue Cross. He files everything for us, so if he walks out the door tomorrow, we have everything in a good, reasonable fashion for us to pick up the work, so.
Thank you. Okay, so, is there a discussion? Is there a
There needs to be
motion?
a motion.
Is there a motion?
I move to act on extending the request for a temporary position to resolve the TPA.
Is there a time frame we're looking at?
I think we requested the $6,000, which is about a 2-month.
2 months. Okay. So it's understood that the motion is to extend the contract so as to fit within a $6,000 amount. Is that
Just to
right?
be clear, he's a VSBIT employee because that's what he has to be, because VI has no
Yeah.
employees. We're actually paying him out of our VSBIT service agreement. So
So we're really reimbursing.
only if we,
Only if we end up
going
going
over
over
the
our
agreement, it's
Understood.
possible we're just absorbing it.
Okay.
But it's still different, so
Right.
you should authorize it.
Okay.
Is 2
Okay,
months
that's the
gonna be
motion,
long
and
enough?
that's our
Do we
understanding.
have a second?
Is there a second?
I'll second
No, Robert beat you to it.
Oh, sorry.
He moved, you didn't, you talked.
So we may be asked to extend again in 2 months?
You could be.
That could be.
Yeah.
That could definitely happen.
Yeah, we keep crossing our fingers.
Well, if you
The nice thing is, he is a really thorough, conscientious thinker, writer. He's very diplomatic in his relationships with dad and dad.
Can I, at the risk of sort of a 15-second delay, where did we find him?
I actually,
She found him.
he used to work for me, he worked at Blue
Okay,
Cross.
great.
and-
Well, congratulations.
He literally walked in the door, I was like, here you go.
That's
We were
true.
that lucky.
That's impressive,
That
because
is-
when
Yeah.
I thought about it, I just didn't see that happen. Any questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Another unanimous decision. We are 11 minutes after 5. Laura has signaled that she really doesn't want to see a motion to adjourn just yet.
Correct. We don't have to set the rate meeting for August.
Oh, I
But
apologize. You're right.
we can do it in 2 weeks, but realize that we have to meet between August 19th and August 30th to set the rates. You can join by phone, we did not have all 6 of you here. It is an important meeting, however, I would like you all involved.
Okay,
But so pay attention to that.
so it will be an agenda item at
We'll have it
a
as an
meeting
item
in
instead
that
of just
timeframe. Okay.
I also wanted to tell you, because I know on our next agenda was supposed to be an update on the roles discussion, my board has directed me not to debate or define or negotiate my role, that's their job to do through the service agreement with you, and not for me to define what the role is. So they have told me not to do that they will be happy to talk with you, as they already indicated in their letter, about what roles you want VSBIT employees to play, and then go from there.
Nothing goes on. A motion to adjourn.
So, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Good, you made it, Joel.